In the tragic final chapter of the web novel, the warrior known as the Demon of the Battlefield cradles his lifeless lover in despair. Having regressed hundreds of times only to watch her perish right before his eyes, he reaches his breaking point and takes her life with his own hands. Overcome by unbearable grief, he descends upon the village alone and unleashes catastrophic flames across the realm. Red fire swallows the fleeing citizens until the entire empire is reduced to smoldering black ash. With nothing left to burn, the ruined hero unhesitatingly slits his own throat to end the tragic tale. Staring at her phone screen, a webtoon editor breaks down in tears over the absurdly destructive finale. She immediately calls the author, shouting in sheer frustration over how a male lead destroying the empire completely ruins the romance fantasy plot they had spent 2 long years planning together. Sipping coffee at a cafe, the author nonchalantly responds that she simply preferred this tragic version, coldly threatening to cancel the contract if it is changed. Driven to utter exasperation, the stressed editor clutches her head on the street, terrified of losing the entire publication deal. Desperate to salvage the story, the editor frantically begs for an in-person meeting while pacing across a busy city intersection. She angrily berates reckless drivers while absorbed in her phone call, completely oblivious as a massive vehicle speeds straight toward her path. A violent impact throws her onto the pedestrian crosswalk, leaving her bleeding on the cold asphalt while horrified bystanders scream for help. As consciousness fades and her eyes slowly close, she lies on the street, feeling nothing but bitter resentment at such an unfair fate. Shuana startles awake as a sharp, demanding voice abruptly shatters her slumber. Before she can even process her surroundings, an irritated Saintess looms directly over her bed, loudly scolding her for lingering in sleep and reminding her that it is her turn to handle all the cleaning duties today. Glancing around the unfamiliar bedroom in utter bewilderment, she blinks repeatedly while wondering who this angry stranger could possibly be. The impatient Saintess refuses to wait, grabbing her arm and forcefully pulling her out of bed despite her startled protest to wait a moment. Carrying a heavy laundry basket along high-arched corridors, she takes in the breathtaking white cathedral and its towering, elegant statues. Yet, seeing everyone around her dressed in matching holy uniforms raises immediate red flags, convincing her that she has somehow stumbled into a bizarre, fanatical cult. Trying to understand how she took on the identity of a junior saintess named Shuana, her mind flashes back to being struck by a fast vehicle on the crosswalk. Since she remains fully conscious, she logically concludes this entire fantasy world is merely a vivid, dramatic coma dream before her eventual awakening. The low hum of distant chatter catches her attention, causing her to pause along the sunlit walkway. Holding her heavy basket tightly against her dress, she casts a lingering, curious glance toward 2 saintesses whispering secretly near the grand courtyard pillars. Watching the women laugh together, she quietly reflects that no matter the world or state of reality, some people always enjoy effortless lives. As an elegantly robed figure in pristine white boots glides past, casual rumors circulate among the crowd that someone is soon to be granted the noble title of Count. The moment the names Sir Raffle Winters and the Kincreed estate echo through the sunlit courtyard, Shuana drops her laundry basket without a second thought. Overcome by a sudden burst of frantic urgency, she lunges straight toward the gossiping saintesses, fiercely demanding that they repeat what they just said while they recoil in utter shock. Breathing heavily as she stands over them, Shuana presses the intimidated women until one sheepishly clarifies the situation. She explains that the acclaimed war hero is arriving at the temple to claim his noble rewards from the emperor, including the dark, demon-cursed fortress of the Kincreed estate. Connecting the terrifying details, Shuana's eyes widen in sheer horror. Still frantically praying that this bizarre reality is merely a vivid coma dream, she slaps her own cheeks with brutal force, only to freeze in shock when a sharp, painful sting burns across her skin. Pushed to the absolute brink of panic, she grabs the startled Saintess tightly by her collar and screams the dramatic title of the web novel right into her face. The trembling woman shrieks in sheer horror, completely misinterpreting the novel's title as a violent threat against her own life. While the Saintesses scramble away from her erratic behavior, Shuana nervously bites her finger as the terrifying truth finally dawns on her. She hasn't slipped into a temporary coma. She has actually been transmigrated as an extra into the exact tragic web novel she was editing right before her fatal accident. A heavy wave of icy dread settles in her chest as the full horror of her reality hits home. If she is truly trapped inside this tragic fantasy story, it means she is doomed to face the terrible climax, where the heartbroken male lead loses his mind and consumes the entire realm in apocalyptic fire. Overcome by sheer frustration, Shuana collapses onto the floor, furiously cursing this author for writing a male lead reckless enough to burn the empire down in 7 days. Lying helplessly on the cold ground, she resolves that whether this reality is real or a dream, she must avoid that terrible fire ending at all costs. When a concerned Saintess approaches to comfort her, suggesting there is always a way to solve her troubles, Shuana's face lights up with sudden inspiration. She instantly jumps up and enthusiastically shouts that they should run away, leaving her companion trembling in panic over such casual blasphemy. Remembering that Raffle underwent multiple regressions after receiving his noble title, Shuana realizes there is still precious time left before the realm burns. Turning to the shocked Saintess, she directly asks how to get out of the temple, but the woman warns her that a Saintess who abandons God faces a grim fate. Undeterred by the stern warning, Shuana's eyes sparkle with pure delight as she innocently asks if she can just quit her duties instead. The nearby Saintesses gasp and recoil in absolute horror, completely unable to comprehend someone treating holy vows so lightly. Determined to make a swift exit, Shuana cheerfully bids them farewell and turns toward the courtyard exit, only to slam headfirst into Asad's chest. Bouncing backward and crashing onto the stone floor with a heavy thud, she winces in pain as a cold, imposing voice questions her words. Towering over her is Saintess Maria, a senior member of the clergy who sternly asks if Shuana truly intends to abandon the temple. Watching the surrounding Saintesses bow in deep reverence before this influential figure, Shuana simply flashes a bright, fearless smile and nonchalantly confirms that she is quitting. Saintess Maria coldly grabs her holy symbol and warns Shuana that abandoning the cathedral means leaving every single possession behind, even hurling sharp insults at her choice. Yet Shuana remains entirely unbothered, calmly informing the senior member that she is walking away on her own 2 feet. Dropping formal speech with a sly, mischievous smirk, Shuana playfully sticks her tongue out at the outraged senior Saintess. She scoffs at the idea that stern warnings could make her stay, completely unbothered by the holy anger boiling behind her. Sprinting eagerly down the grand marble corridors, Shuana completely ignores the solemn atmosphere of the cathedral. As a startled temple guard calls out to ask where she is going, she loudly shouts back that she has officially quit her duties and keeps running. Leaping gracefully onto the sunlit garden grass, Shuana revels in the sweet taste of long-awaited freedom. She gleefully shouts goodbye to the holy sanctuary, declaring that she hopes to never encounter any of them ever again. Before she can even take another step, a sharp, demanding voice violently screams at her to wake up. Shuana startles awake in bed with wide, bewildered eyes, staring at her surrounding room in utter shock as she realizes her entire daring escape was nothing more than a brief dream. Shuana startles awake to urgent demands, sitting upright with a sharp scream that completely terrifies her companion. Grasping her dress in confusion, she sits flustered on the bed while the fellow Saintess angrily scolds her, demanding to know why on earth she is screaming so loudly first thing in the morning. When Shuana asks if she had not already left, her companion reacts with sheer disbelief, reminding her that no one simply walks out of the temple without facing disaster. Yet sitting frozen on her bed, Shuana stares ahead in shock, completely certain that her memory of leaving was far too vivid to be a dream. She vividly remembers the overwhelming joy of stepping out into freedom after so long. But the exact instant she crossed the threshold, an unknown phenomenon rewound time itself, snapping her right back to the very moment she first possessed this body. A chilling realization sets in as she recalls Raphael Winters, the cursed protagonist trapped in an endless nightmare of rebirth. Gazing at the memory of his crimson eyes amidst flames, she realizes with horror that she too has regressed. Determined not to remain trapped in this hopeless cycle, Shuana leaps from her bed and loudly announces that she is quitting her position as a Saintess. Before she can take a step, her companion forcefully grabs her arm, shouting that she cannot just leave when it is her turn to clean today. When her companion angrily accuses her of trying to flee while wearing the sacred Saintess necklace, Shuana removes it without a second thought and hands it back. Remembering that the corrupt high priestesses take it in the original story anyway, she happily surrenders the ornament, intending to keep only the robes. Dashing away without a single regret, Shuana leaves her companion standing frozen in total astonishment. The fellow Saintess clutches her chest in utter shock, admitting to herself that she had only brought up the necklace to intimidate her, never imagining Shuana would actually run. Sprinting hard through the open courtyard, panic tightens in Shuana's chest as terrifying thoughts flood her mind. If trying to walk out forces a time reset every single time, remaining trapped here means she will be completely helpless when the Empire inevitably burns in a sea of flames. A temple guard gasps in surprise as a white gown blurs past him at full speed. When he calls out to demand where she is headed, Shuana screams at the top of her lungs that she quits her position, leaving the bewildered soldier crouching on the stone floor in utter confusion. Standing around doubting her memories will accomplish nothing, so Shuana grits her teeth and forces her legs to move faster. Clenching her fists with fiery resolve, she drives her weight into every single step, determined to break through the temple boundary and challenge her fate head-on. Shuana hurls herself across the threshold with everything she has, her boots landing heavily on the outer stone pavement. She freezes in her tracks, her chest heaving as she nervously waits for the inescapable snap of time rewinding. She cautiously glances over her shoulder with wide, anxious eyes, fully expecting a blinding flash to reset her morning. Yet as the heavy silence lingers around her, no mysterious magic pulls her back onto her bed. Staring at the towering sanctuary doors behind her, a thrilling realization washes over her flustered mind. Simply stepping outside the holy grounds does not trigger a time reset every single time, proving that her freedom is finally within reach. Overwhelmed by an overwhelming wave of relief, a wide, euphoric smile bursts across her face. Pumping her fists in total excitement, Shuana lifts her heavy white robes and gleefully runs as fast as her legs can carry her. After dashing continuously to put distance between herself and the sanctuary, she skids to a halt on a crowded street. Looking around at the busy market stalls and passing citizens, she realizes a lively village lies immediately beside the temple. Recollecting her memory of the novel, Shuana remembers that the story only ever described the distant Kincreed estate, leaving her unfamiliar with these surroundings. Watching the villagers chat around her, she decides to gather information to aid her escape. Stepping into the bustling village market, Shuana looks around to gather her bearings, but a rude passerby violently collides with her shoulder. The forceful blow knocks her flat onto the hard stone pavement, yet the man simply clicks his tongue with total disdain before coldly walking away. Sitting on the cobblestones in absolute shock, Shuana fumes over his atrocious behavior, but her indignation is cut short when a small boy nearby points in her direction, excitedly calling out to his mother about the strange woman wearing sacred robes. The mother instantly covers her child's mouth, harshly whispering that anyone without a sacred necklace is no saintess at all, but a wicked ghoul. Shuana clutches her head in sheer panic as the horrifying reality dawns on her. Freely surrendering her necklace back at the temple has branded her an evil monster. Desperately racking her memory of the original novel, a disturbing realization strikes her flustered mind. The story focused purely on the dramatic romance between a noble lady and a mad knight, completely omitting any details about the temple system or the local superstitions governing this world. Suddenly, a jagged stone streaks through the air and strikes her head with a brutal impact. Crimson blood trickles down her face as she touches her wounded temple in shock, while a mob of enraged villagers gathers around her, hurling violent curses and ordering the outcast witch to get out of their town. As the enraged mob hurls vicious curses and demands the wicked witch return to hell, Shuana clutches her bleeding forehead in sheer panic. Desperately fleeing through the village streets while the furious crowd gives chase, she struggles to comprehend why these terrifying superstitions were completely omitted from the original novel. Sprinting frantically into the outer wilderness, Shuana wonders in sheer exhaustion if she somehow landed inside a sinister cult scripture rather than the romantic novel. Her boot catches the rough ground, sending her crashing flat onto the hard dirt. Sitting scraped, bruised, and bleeding under the evening sky, tears of pain fill her eyes. Recalling the cryptic warnings from the temple priestesses about the dark fate awaiting anyone who abandons God, the horrifying reality finally clicks. With a bitter, bloodied smirk, Shuana realizes her fellow Saintess intentionally let her surrender the sacred necklace without warning her that the public would brand her a monstrous ghoul. As darkness settles deep over the quiet forest, Shuana halts in complete astonishment. Looking around the shadowy clearing, she gapes in disbelief as a quaint wooden house suddenly materializes right before her eyes out of nowhere. Figuring that web novel logic is granting her a convenient sanctuary right when she needs rest, Shuana steps up to the mysterious cottage. She raises her bruised hand to knock firmly on the wooden door, calling out nervously into the night to check anyone is home. Hesitantly asking into the dark night if she might stay for just a single evening, Shuana's eyes widen in sheer astonishment as the heavy wooden door unexpectedly creaks open all on its own. Stepping cautiously over the threshold into the dimly lit interior, she peers into the eerie room and calls out into the silence, quickly realizing that there really isn't anyone home. Suddenly, the door slams shut behind her with a deafening crash. Screaming in utter fright, she clutches her chest in panic before gasping that it must have simply been the wind. Realizing the mysterious cottage is entirely abandoned, an overwhelming wave of exhaustion rapidly overpowers her lingering fear. Throwing her arms up in complete defeat, Shuana collapses straight onto the floor, far too worn out to care. Mentally offering her sincere apologies to the absent landlord, she promises to thoroughly clean the whole house before leaving tomorrow, softly begging only to rest her bruised, aching body for one quiet night. As she drifts into deep sleep, dark, shadowy hands adorned with ominous red eyes slowly creep across the room toward her motionless frame, while she helplessly prays that this nightmare is finally over. Opening her eyes to the soft morning light, she takes a quiet moment to gather her thoughts after a long, exhausting sleep. Stretching her arms, she realizes with a heavy sigh that her bizarre situation was not just a dream after all. Noticing the heavy stains ruining her dress, she pauses in bewilderment. Dark, ominous shadows swirl beneath her hem, but she merely brushes them off, assuming the dirt came from yesterday's chaotic mob throwing stones at her. A sudden rumble in her stomach shifts her focus entirely to food. Walking toward the doorway, her boots crush the creeping dark entity underfoot without a second thought as she prepares to step outside in search of a decent meal. As she reaches for the door, an ominous chill fills the room behind her. A monstrous creature of pitch-black shadow with blazing red eyes materializes out of the darkness, looming right over her shoulder with lethal intent. She senses a slight draft and glances back in confusion, entirely unaware of the deadly threat standing right behind her. The giant shadow monster raises its massive clawed hand, preparing to strike her down with full force. Without even noticing the strike, she shoves the heavy wooden door open with all her weight. The force flings the door backward, flattening the gigantic shadow beast onto the ground while she steps outside, complaining about the stiff door. Stepping out into the sunlight, she is startled when a panicked villager shouts at her, frantically asking if she actually spent the night inside that house. Before she can answer properly, he gets right in her face, spitting as he screams in disbelief. The man presses further, asking if she heard strange dragging noises or crying during the night. Looking at her intently, he demands to know if she feels suffocated or unable to move, leaving her completely baffled by his intense questioning. The strange encounter instantly reminds her of pushy scammers from her past life trying to sell spiritual cures. Deciding that running away is her best option, she quickly turns on her heel and slips into the forest while he calls out after her. The next day, as she sits outside chewing on fresh grass, another villager runs up to challenge her for entering the cabin. She begins to realize that this abandoned house must be an infamous local urban legend. Day after day, passers-by stop in shock as she casually stretches in the morning sun. Tired of the endless harassment, she lounges on the lawn and dismisses them, telling them to leave unless they plan to hand over money. By evening, her patience completely snaps. Fuming with rage, she throws her hands up and shouts in frustration, furious that the locals treat her like a sideshow attraction and keep insisting she ought to be sick. Meanwhile, deep inside the shadowy darkness of the cabin, a mysterious unseen presence clicks its tongue in annoyance. Thoroughly exhausted and deeply frustrated by the villagers' constant harassment, she collapses onto the bed with a heavy sigh. Resolving to stop dwelling on her hopeless situation, she closes her eyes tight and quietly prays to wake up back in her own world tomorrow. As deep darkness fills the room, sinister red claw marks and glowing crimson eyes materialize out of the shadows. Ominous dark liquid drips directly onto her sleeping face as a lethal demonic curse sits right over her, completely oblivious to the terrifying presence hovering in the dark. Suddenly, sharp, rhythmic knocks echo through the quiet cabin, snapping her wide awake. Her eyes burst open in sudden shock, and she bolts upright on the bed with a racing heart, staring anxiously toward the front door as the unexpected visitor continues knocking. Tension thickens as she lingers on the bed, staring nervously at the entrance. A sudden wave of panic washes over her as she suddenly realizes that this dilapidated, supposedly abandoned cabin might not be vacant after all, leaving her worried about trespassing. Gathering her courage, she makes her way to the entryway and cautiously opens the door. Looming in the doorway is a tall, striking man in a pristine white cloak, leaving her utterly stunned as she sheepishly asks if he happens to be the real homeowner. Attempting to apologize for trespassing, she stammers out an explanation, but her words stall the moment she catches sight of his face. Blushing slightly, she finds herself completely mesmerized by the striking, handsome stranger standing before her. Her brief admiration is instantly shattered when he raises his hand to signal his men. Before she can process what is happening, 2 guards seize her arms and accuse former Saintess Shuana of witchery, leaving her utterly speechless with shock. The man coldly explains there was a report about a Saintess deliberately occupying spirit-infested houses. Furious at the accusation, she thrashes against the guards and screams in protest, insisting she is a law-abiding citizen trapped in a romance fantasy, not an occult horror. Baffled by her frantic rambling, he dismisses her complaints and turns to point directly at the dilapidated cabin behind her. He sternly reminds her that every single residence she has inhabited so far carries a deadly reputation. Striking a dramatic pose with a hand over his face, he ominously warns that these lands are consumed by malevolent spirits, insisting that ordinary people die the moment they set foot near them. Grimacing at his dramatic theatrics, she insists the accusation is completely absurd since ghosts cannot possibly exist here. Pushed to her limit, she sarcastically asks if he is going to claim he sees spirits too, while he gazes back at her with unbothered silence. As the stern guards look on with cold indifference, she stammers in sheer disbelief, unable to process the harsh reality unfolding around her. Without a shred of mercy, the commander orders his men to drag her away. Bound tightly in ropes, she thrashes against her captors and screams in protest. But the guards drag her through the woods before roughly shoving her onto the hard ground right at their leader's feet. Kneeling respectfully, the commander presents his prisoner to a grandly dressed, veiled figure, reporting that the servant of evil spirits has been captured. The great Saintess warmly praises Holy Knight Commander Michael, who humbly accepts her compliment. Desperate to clear her name, she calls out from the ground, frantically pleading that a terrible mistake has been made. Forcing an anxious smile, she insists she knows nothing of witches or evil spirits and begs them to untie her. Looming over her, the great Saintess gazes down with cold pity, heartlessly declaring that anyone serving dark forces is entirely beyond redemption. Horrified by the cruel pronouncement, she stammers back in confusion as terror sets in. Enraged by the mindless accusations, she angrily shouts in protest. But the great Saintess turns away unbothered. With a serene expression beneath her veil, she coldly commands her followers to prepare for the purification ritual. Her breath catches as realization strikes, her eyes widening in sheer horror. Staring ahead, she spots a tall wooden stake surrounded by a massive pile of firewood, finally realizing the horrifying fate they have prepared for her. Struggling wildly against the heavy ropes binding her wrists, she thrashes in fury and screams at her captors to release her at once. Tied tightly to the execution stake, she stares back in sheer disbelief as the great Saintess offers nothing but a cold, sinister smile beneath her lace veil. As a knight steps forward holding a blazing torch, pure panic instantly takes hold. She screams at the top of her lungs, frantically begging him not to set the wood ablaze while desperately declaring her absolute innocence. Roaring flames quickly ignite around the stake, but she continues to furiously shout modern threats and desperate warnings at the gathered crowd. Thick smoke and unbearable heat suddenly envelop her, leaving her coughing and gasping for breath amidst the rising inferno. Choking on the dense smoke, she desperately cries out for someone to extinguish the raging blaze. Standing stoically behind the flames, the great Saintess watches her suffer with a malicious grin before coldly commanding her guards to put out the fire. As the heavy smoke slowly settles around her, a sharp electric blue eye snaps open with unyielding determination, making it abundantly clear that her fight is far from over. Trapped within a nightmare of blazing flames and desperate cries for help, shadowy figures stand impassive as fire consumes everything. A veiled Saintess grins menacingly through the heat, her eyes glowing red amid the terrible destruction. Gasping for air, she snaps awake in terror, her chest heaving as the phantom warmth fades. But before she can process the lingering horror, another Saintess sharply demands she get up, reminding her that today is her turn to clean. Her wide eyes tremble as the searing pain of burning alive feels painfully real against her skin. Clutching her sacred emblem with shaking hands, she realizes with mounting dread that death did not grant her release. She has returned once more. Calling out to Errol, she looks up from her bed and abruptly asks if she has ever witnessed a witch trial. Errol blinks in utter confusion, wondering if a bad dream prompted such an unsettling, random question so early in the morning. Errol recalls seeing Saintesses burned at the stake during her childhood after they attempted to escape their harsh life at the temple. The grim reality serves as a stark warning to anyone harboring thoughts of fleeing their sacred duties. As Errol accuses her of using a nightmare as an excuse to slack off, her fingers grip the bedsheets in quiet desperation. The horrifying truth dawns on her. Bound to this novel's tragic narrative, even dying will not grant her freedom. Errol falls completely silent, standing at the doorway and staring back with concern as a heavy, uncomfortable hush settles between them. Errol snaps in frustration, accusing Shuana of acting superior just because of her noble background. She harshly reminds her that regardless of status, they are both low-ranking Saintesses bound to daily manual labor, sharply commanding her to get up and clean. Pushed past her limit, Shuana grabs Errol by the collar and shouts back in defiance. She refuses to be treated like a personal maid, declaring with fierce irritation that cleaning is not the only duty she was meant for. Her anger suddenly evaporates when Errol breaks down into heavy, trembling tears. Sobbing, Errol reveals she spent 10 terrifying days doing Shuana's chores while Shuana lay motionless with a fatal fever. Shuana realizes with a heavy heart that the original girl truly passed away right here, leaving her peer genuinely traumatized. Quickly shifting tactics, Shuana gently rests her hands on Errol's shoulders and softly apologizes, offering to cover all of Errol's cleaning duties for the next 10 days. Errol's tears melt into flattered pride at being addressed as a knowledgeable senior, making Shuana internally celebrate her swift victory. Following Errol toward the kitchen, Shuana puts on a bright, compliant facade. Beneath her pleasant smile lies a calculated resolve. She will earn the temple's trust and gather critical intelligence until she can break free from this oppressive cult forever. Over the following days, Shuana works tirelessly sweeping the vast stone courtyard while keeping Errol happily talking. Flattering her senior's ego proves remarkably effective, allowing Shuana to gradually piece together crucial details about the temple's layout and daily routines. Her diligent effort pays off when she successfully locates the hidden document storage room, which houses the private personal records of every Saintess. However, as a low-ranking junior, she lacks the clearance to step inside, leaving her contemplating how to gain access. While sweeping near the arched corridors, Shuana perks up as two senior Saintesses speak in hushed tones behind a stone pillar. Sneaking closer, her eyes widen in utter shock when she hears them gossiping about her own past, claiming she was never the Baron's true daughter. The gossip reveals a tragic backstory. After uncovering his wife's infidelity, the Baron stripped Shuana of her noble identity and locked her away in a dark attic for years. The moment she turned 10, he unceremoniously sold the helpless child off to the temple. Stepping away from the murmuring voices, Shuana feels a deep pang of sorrow for the innocent girl whose body she now inhabits. Gazing upward into the open sky, she bitterly reflects on how relentless and unforgiving survival has been for both of them in this world. Her somber mood shifts instantly when Paul, the warm-hearted temple chef, calls out to her from across the hall. Seamlessly donning a radiant angelic smile, Shuana turns to greet him warmly, happily sharing that her assigned cleaning station for tomorrow will be the library. Chef Paul loudly praises Shuana in front of the other Saintesses, declaring that no one else can match her skill in the kitchen. Maintaining her radiant angelic act, Shuana humbly begs him not to be harsh on her peers, pretending to be overwhelmed with gratitude just to serve. When Paul asks her age, Shuana softly replies that she will turn 18 next month. Whispering confidentially, Paul promises to speak with Barbara so she will be appointed a senior Saintess, prompting Shuana to put on a show of flustered modesty and hesitation. Paul reassures her to simply trust his word, leaving Shuana behind with a dark, cunning grin. She knows with total certainty that this promotion will happen. Having successfully secured the exact same rank in her previous timeline through her carefully calculated performance, her strategy never fails. By kneeling outside the prayer room late at night and shedding dramatic tears of feigned devotion, she easily draws out the high priestess to grant her promotion. Yet beneath her pious expression, Shuana harbors deep dread for the ritual that inevitably follows. Inside the grand sanctuary flanked by guards, the high priestess offers a blessing in the name of Moandala as blue magical fire ignites in her palms. Shuana kneels submissively on the cold floor before the holy assembly, awaiting the binding rite. The searing blue flames coil tightly around her wrist, burning intensely against her skin until a glowing sacred emblem permanently engraves itself onto the back of her hand, marking her elevated rank within the order. In her previous lives, receiving the stigmata was a death sentence. The overwhelming agony of the magical blue flames seared through her body, causing her to scream out in unbearable pain and collapse under the watchful eyes of the temple guards. Across repeated regressions, Shuana was forced to relive this agonizing ritual again and again. Through sheer endurance, she gradually mastered the pain, training her mind to withstand the searing magical heat on her skin. Emerging unscathed, Shuana proudly displays the freshly engraved sacred mark glowing on her hand. The high priestess nods with quiet satisfaction, completely fooled by Shuana's serene, prayerful facade, even as Shuana secretly finds the entire holy ceremony utterly tedious. Kneeling before the high altar, Shuana reflects on the hard lessons of her previous lives. She knows escaping is impossible for a low-ranking Saintess, making the freedom granted to senior members through purification missions her only way out. Dressed in her newly earned senior robes, she listens attentively as the high priestess announces a count's investiture ceremony scheduled for the following morning. Clasping her hands in feigned humility, Shuana dutifully promises to attend her first official assignment as a senior Saintess. As the afternoon sun shines bright over the grand temple spires, Shuana conceals her true intention beneath her holy vow. Once this mandatory ceremony concludes, she will take the very first purification mission available and leave this cult forever. Her carefully laid plan shatters into pieces the very moment the investiture ceremony gets underway. Standing frozen alongside the solemn saintesses, Shuana watches in stunned disbelief as the true guest of honor slowly strides down the central aisle toward the altar. Her heart freezes in utter horror as she recognizes the dark, formidable noble stepping into view. Standing before her is Raffle Winters, the dangerous protagonist whose impending madness is destined to consume the entire empire in a sea of flames. Gently tending to her battered and bruised hands, he gazes at her with deep worry and asks if she needs to be taken to a hospital right away. She softly insists that she is all right, though her heavily bandaged fingers betray the pain she feels. Looking into each other's eyes with heavy hearts, they earnestly ask one another to promise never to attempt anything so dangerously reckless again. Sealing in their quiet, solemn pact, a slender red thread binds their promise together. As they walk together through the quiet evening, she casually remarks that the air is beginning to carry the distinct scent of summer. Realizing mid-sentence that he has no sense of smell, she flinchingly stammers a quick apology and tries to explain how every season feels different. She berates herself internally for her clumsy words, left feeling entirely unsure of how she should even act around him after everything they have been through. Noticing his intense, unmoving gaze fixed directly upon her, she grows deeply self-conscious and awkwardly tries to adjust her bandaged hand. She begs him to stop staring at her like that, reassuring him that she is truly fine now. He casually turns his head away, maintaining a cool facade as he quietly claims that he was not looking at her for any particular reason. A heavy silence settles between them against the warm backdrop of the setting sun. As they gaze at each other without a word, uncertainty weighs down on her heart, making her eyes brim with unspoken emotion. Looking down toward the ground in deep hesitation, she wonders to herself if their relationship has irreversibly altered, terrified that they might never be able to go back to how things used to be. Breaking the tense quiet, he abruptly brings up an old memory from their dorm room, recalling the time she suddenly surprised him with a dramatic flair. The sudden mention of that day instantly sparks a memory in her mind, sending a wave of absolute mortification through her body. As she realizes he remembers every single detail, her face turns bright red in sheer panic and utter embarrassment. He continues with calm honesty, adding that being on the receiving end of her unexpected display back then was quite a shock for him. Absolutely horrified that he is bringing up such a cringe-worthy topic out in the open, she screams in protest and buries her bursting face in her bandaged hands, desperately wishing she could disappear right into the ground. Leaning in closer, he tilts his head and asks with genuine curiosity whether her dramatic gesture back then was actually an attempt to seduce him. That shocking question completely shatters what little composure she has left. Clenching her head in utter chaos, she screams out in hysterical denial, insisting that he has completely lost his mind for even thinking such a wild thought. Refusing to let the embarrassing topic drop, he leans in with a glint of playful mischief in his eyes, teasingly pressing her to reveal what her dramatic gesture was really meant to convey. Mortified to her very core, she buries her burning face in her bandaged hands and desperately begs him to forget the entire incident. Yet, he simply strolls alongside her with a breezy, amused smile, lightly remarking that her past antics certainly left an indelible impression on him that was far from useless. Softening his expression as he gazes down at her frantic reaction, he lets out a quiet chuckle and warmly admits that he actually found her dramatic display quite adorable back then. That unexpected compliment instantly shatters what little composure she has left, sending a shockwave of utter disbelief right through her. As she clutches her hoodie in bewildered horror, he breaks into cheerful laughter, teasing that she has no idea just how ridiculous she looked in that moment. Thoroughly enjoying her flustered state, he dramatically reenacts her past behavior right in front of her, biting his lip with an exaggerated blush and mimicking the eager look in her eyes. As she stands completely frozen in shock, he playfully pulls at his robe collar and teasingly accuses her of harboring shameless, romantic thoughts about him on a daily basis, laughingly calling her a complete pervert for looking at him that way. Completely crushed under the weight of her mortification, she sinks to the pavement and curls into a tight, miserable ball, pleading for him to stop talking before she dies of pure shame. Her dramatic collapse draws the concern of a passing elderly stranger, who mistakes her posture for deep life despair and kindly offers words of encouragement to stay strong. Sweating with awkward remorse as the elder walks away, he stammers out a flustered apology to her motionless, crouching figure. Glaring up at him through her bandaged fingers with a face still burning red with heat, she fiercely threatens that he is dead if he ever dares to bring up that shameful memory again. Taken aback by the sheer intensity of her warning, he nervously laughs and hastily promises to obey, meekly submitting to her demands as the warm sunset sky fades above them into twilight. Softening his demeanor completely, he gently calls out her name, Kyungi, and crouches down to meet her eye level against the backdrop of the sunset. Reaching his hand tenderly toward her face, his gaze turns remarkably quiet and earnest as he softly asks if she'd be willing to step away and go somewhere special with him. As night settles over the forest, he snaps his fingers and summons a luminous blue butterfly that flutters gracefully into his hand, casting a soft magical glow to light their path through the dark woods. Astounded by the unexpected feature, she gazes at the shimmering insect in wonder before following close behind him down the shadowy trail, curiously questioning where he is taking her while he warmly bids her to follow without worry. As they continue walking together through the quiet night, Kyung-hee looks at him with mild confusion and asks why he specifically asked her to purchase a heat pack when summer is already right around the corner. Waving the warm pack in her hand, she insists that she is not cold in the slightest, but he simply chuckles with bright amusement, playfully shushing her endless questions with a warm, mysterious smile. Stepping out from beneath the dark forest canopy, he unveils a breathtaking grassy hilltop overlooking an expansive horizon under a magnificent night sky brimming with countless shimmering stars. Astounded by the magnificent sight unfolding above them, a delicate blush spreads across her face as she gazes upward in pure wonder, softly murmuring to herself that she has never seen so many stars in her entire life. Gazing up at her awestruck expression with quiet affection, he sits down comfortably on the grass and gently pats the ground beside him, inviting her to sit down with him and place the heat pack right on the dirt. Still somewhat puzzled by his unexpected request, she quietly crouches down into the tall grass and carefully lays the warm pack on the ground between them. The moment the heat pack touches the earth, he's smoothly right on top of hers, absorbing the soothing heat into his palm. Gazing at her with a radiant, open smile and flushed cheeks, happily remarking on how warm he feels today. Looking down in wide-eyed shock, the realization that he went through all this trouble just so he could offer her a warm hand to hold hits her deeply, sending a profound wave of emotion swelling through her heart. Interlocking his fingers firmly with hers beneath the vast night skies, the shimmering magical blue butterfly flutters softly beside them in the dark as he tenderly calls her by her name, Kyung-hee. Sitting closely together on the grassy field, his cheerful, playful demeanor completely dissolves into a quiet, earnest expression, gazing into her eyes with striking intensity as he softly reveals to her that he thinks he needs to become human. Beneath the quiet glow of the midnight moon, the Saintess pushes open the creaking wooden door and steps outside into the cool night air. She freezes in sudden surprise as heavy boots drop silently from above, landing right behind her. Panic surges through her as she fears she has been caught by a holy knight. But as she turns around, she is met not by a temple guard, but by a towering, dark-clad stranger looming over her in the moonlight. Recognizing his face, she points in utter shock and stammers out a question. Before another word can escape her lips, he lunges forward and slams her against the stone wall, clamping a heavy gloved hand tightly over her mouth. Drawing a sharp dagger from his waist, he glides the steel up and presses the cold edge directly against her throat. She stands pinned and motionless beneath his gaze as lethal danger settles over them. A sinister smirk spreads across his face as his crimson eyes gleam in the darkness. Noting that she does not flinch, he leans in close and warns her with deadly calm that screaming will cost her life. Defiant despite the blade pressed against her neck, she glares back at him with unyielding eyes. She questions why someone like him would corner a secluded, forgotten Saintess who never steps beyond the temple grounds. She warns that the holy knight nearby will execute him if he dares to kill her, but Count Winters only smirks, answering that a fugitive Saintess holds no value. Refusing to let terror control her, she glares straight into his eyes and demands to know his true purpose. Observing her defiant glare, the Count notes that she harbors a sharp resentment rather than terror. It piques his curiosity, wondering why a woman who has never met him before looks at him with such deep-seated hostility. Addressing Count Winters directly, she reminds him that private contact with a Saintess is strictly forbidden and threatens to call for help. Unshaken by her warning, he coldly retorts that shouting will cost her life, accusing her of interfering with his mission. Gliding his blade toward her waist, he asks why she is wearing ordinary clothes during work hours, especially garments crawling with the bitter resentment of the dead. His unnerving ability to perceive the spirits leaves her stunned. Deciding to ignore his mysterious claims, she carefully shifts her feet to slip past him into the shadows. But the Count moves instantly, stepping heavy boots into her path and blocking her escape once more against the wooden wall. He coldly insists her movements are not her own, claiming an evil spirit inside her clothes is controlling her steps. As he presses the cold blade dangerously against her skin, she panics and tries to make him listen to reason. Having heard enough of his absurd accusations, she decides words are useless. Shifting her weight, she drives a hard kick straight into his leg, catching the dangerous Count completely off guard. Refusing to back down, the Saintess shouts directly into his face, commanding the dangerous male lead to listen to her. Her sudden, brazen outburst catches Count Winters completely off guard, momentarily shattering his calm composure. Recovering his footing, a subtle smirk creeps back onto his lips as he realizes he was right all along. Looking at her with growing amusement, the Count amusedly declares that she is certainly no ordinary Saintess. Irritated by his persistent smirking, she demands to know what he saw during the conferment ceremony that made him target her. But as her question lingers in the night air, a heavy silence falls between them beneath the cold moonlight. Recalling a past memory where a senior Saintess reprimanded her for ignoring others, she realizes how maddening it feels to be dismissed. Gritting her teeth, she completely loses her temper and shouts at Count Winters, asking if he has ever had a real friend or engaged in a normal conversation, catching the lethal man entirely by surprise. Without holding back, she unleashes a blunt barrage of criticisms, pointing out how he ruins the atmosphere whenever he speaks, and suggesting he learn basic social skills before attempting to gather information. Her scathing lecture pierces his pride, causing a dark, dangerous aura to swirl ominously around him. Despite his cold, menacing presence, Raffle Winters was not always this unfeeling. Long ago, when he was just a dedicated escort knight, his first regression was triggered by the death of Lady Celendia Dawson, the woman he risked everything to protect. He turned back time hundreds of times to save her life, yet every loop ended in tragic failure. Sickened by the relentless cycle of loss, his emotions rotted into total despair. Trapped in an endless cycle of time, he was only able to move forward into the future after taking her life with his own hands. Yet the mysterious regressions never truly stopped, gradually twisting the once dedicated knight into a cold and dangerous monster. Errol directly questions how he recognized her at the conferment ceremony, claiming her status as a high-ranking Saintess naturally granted her a place there. But Count Winters coldly shuts her down, declaring that position was never meant to belong to her. Her eyes widen in sudden realization as the truth dawns upon her. Having lived through hundreds of past timelines, the Count had always seen someone else standing in her place during the ceremony, making her unexpected presence an unsettling anomaly. Desperate to avoid getting entangled in his tragic fate, Errol carefully steps back and feigns complete ignorance. But before she can slip into the shadows, a holy knight calls out for Saintess Shuana through a lit window, startling them both in the quiet night. Panic surges through Errol as she realizes she has stalled far too long to make her planned escape. Pinned against the wooden wall with precious time slipping away, she places a hand over her chest, urgently coming up with a cover story to calm his suspicions. Clasping her hands together in mock devotion, she puts on a sweet, innocent smile. She earnestly lies that she wore ordinary clothes solely to offer a humble purification prayer and drive away evil spirits lingering on the temple grounds. Count Winters smirks with dark amusement, dryly questioning whether she truly wasn't trying to flee from him. Seizing the momentary break in his focus, Errol slips past his arm into the doorway, coldly expressing her hope that they never meet again. As heavy footsteps come to a sudden halt right behind her, Count Winters looms ominously in the quiet corridor. Glaring down at her with cold intensity, he dryly questions whether she truly intends to abandon the sacred temple for good. Feeling his dark, suffocating aura wrap around her, Errol freezes in nervous hesitation. She frantically swallows down her surging panic, struggling to maintain a calm and unbothered expression beneath his sharp, relentless gaze. Clasping her hands together with a sweet, pious smile, she lies right to his face, claiming she is perfectly content living under divine grace. Intrigued by her flawless act, the dangerous Count finally turns and steps out into the cool night air. The moment the heavy door slams shut him, Errol gasps in intense frustration, realizing her golden opportunity to escape tonight has completely slipped away. But before she can even gather her thoughts, the holy knight outside loudly calls out her name. Shouting back in a panic that she is still amidst her sacred prayers, Errol frantically dives onto the floor, adopting a pious posture just as the blonde knight commander pushes open the door and bursts inside. Looking down at her with sudden concern, the knight commander softly asks if she is all right. Surrounded by a radiant halo of divine light, Errol kneels gracefully beside her holy vestments, appearing every bit the picture of pure, selfless devotion. She turns to him with a gentle, glowing smile, softly assuring the commander that everything is fine. But beneath her serene saintly facade, her hand clutches her hidden disguise tightly against her chest, fiercely resolving to make her grand escape another day. When the Holy Knight Commander steps into the chamber, his eyes widen in utter surprise as he catches her wearing simple commoner attire instead of her holy robes. Noticing his bewildered gaze, she offers a soft, reassuring smile and explains that a powerful evil spirit dwells inside the garment, resisting all ordinary prayer. She softly confesses she tried wearing the dress during her prayers to cleanse it, though her strength was ultimately not enough. The commander reassures her that avoiding possession is impressive in itself, yet insists she must leave, as she has prayed far beyond her allotted time. Determined, she speaks up to press her point deeper. Looking up earnestly, she insists the house is far too dangerous and must be purified by tomorrow at the latest. When he gestures kindly, warning that she has overexerted herself and needs rest, she passionately refuses, proclaiming she cannot forsake sacred duty for her own comfort. He gazes back at her in stunned silence. Moved by her fierce devotion, he asks her to accompany him at the earliest opportunity, an offer she readily accepts. An awkward, heavy stillness fills the room as they stand facing one another in silence, the discarded white robes resting quietly on the floor between them. Glancing down awkwardly, she breaks the silence by mentioning she must change her clothes before they return. A slight blush crossing his face, the commander politely turns aside and offers to wait outside while she tidies up, leaving her with a gentle word of thanks as the wooden door creaks shut. The instant the heavy door latches close, her gentle, virtuous expression vanishes into a frustrated grimace. Sighing in annoyance at how needlessly dutiful he is, she reaches behind herself to unlace her dress, determined that her trick will surely work the next time. Just as she turns to gather her thoughts, a neatly folded piece of high-quality paper slips quietly to the floor. Puzzled by the fine parchment, she reaches down to pick it up and unfolds it, only for her calm expression to shatter into utter shock as she reads the message left behind. The note is a direct message from the male lead, telling her to come find him if she ever regresses once more. A nervous sweat breaks out on her face as she stares at the paper, stunned by his sheer audacity and frustrated that he somehow slipped it into her clothing completely unnoticed. Standing in the warmth of her room, she fumes over the absurd situation, knowing that getting entangled with him will only delay her eventual escape from this novel. Refusing to let his antics alter her path, she crumples the high-quality note and throws it directly into the roaring fireplace, turning away with fierce determination burning in her eyes. As the flames consume the paper, haunting memories of a past fire suddenly flood her mind. She sees a desperate woman calling out through the inferno and running legs frantically trying to pull young Yoonhye out of a burning room before it is too late. The sudden resurfacing of these buried memories leaves her frozen in shock as the truth hits her. Clenching her hand into a tight fist at her side, her path becomes clear. She must return home immediately to seek answers from her parents. Refusing to let the male lead disrupt her plans, she turns around with a sharp look of determination, remembering that her next assigned purification target is the port town of Floriana. She immediately crouches down in the quiet corner of her chamber. Reaching for the loose stone tile in the floor, she carefully pulls it open to reveal the secret maps hidden underneath. As she lifts the weathered parchment into the dim light, memories of how she first obtained it begin to return. Flashbacks take her back to a sunny day outside the grand temple walls, where a kindly old chef sat beside her on the stone steps. When he pointed out the route to Floriana, the young Saintess had stared in utter confusion at the unfamiliar nautical markings. Amused by her sweet curiosity, the chef gently patted her hair and warmly promised to bring her even more maps over time. Overjoyed by his kindness, young Shuana had hugged the precious chart tight to her chest, thrilled to possess her very own map. Returning to the present moment, her brilliant blue eyes widen with unwavering focus. Clutching the old parchment firmly against her chest, her mind is completely made up. She will use this purification mission as her chance to break free. By the next morning, brilliant sunlight washes over the majestic arches of the temple courtyard. Dressed in her elaborate white holy robes, she carries a heavy brown travel trunk across the stone path, pausing when a familiar voice calls out her name. Sir Malik comes bounding forward with an energetic wave, enthusiastically declaring that traveling alongside such a devout holy woman fills his heart with renewed faith. She responds with a sweet, pious smile, secretly praying that if monsters appear and he flees in terror, it will grant her the perfect opening to vanish. Just as Sir Malik eagerly steps forward to carry her heavy brown travel trunk, a stern voice abruptly cuts him off. Stepping into the courtyard beside the veiled great Saintess, Holy Knight Commander Michael Severino moves between them, announcing that Shuana's escort assignment for the purification mission has been changed. Stunned by the sudden change, Shuana stands frozen in the courtyard as the great Saintess glides over and places a firm, gentle hand on her shoulder. Explaining that the port town of Floriana is far too grim and perilous, the senior Saintess insists it is only fitting for the Knight Commander himself to safeguard her. Looking down beneath her lace veil, the great Saintess offers a subtle smile, her intense gaze casting an unnerving shadow over the conversation. Sensing the immense pressure behind the question, Shuana manages to hold a polite, calm smile, concealing the deep apprehension surging within her. Bowing her head with dutiful grace, Shuana softly assures her that regardless of who accompanies her, she only exists to carry out her sacred divine calling. Visibly pleased by her humble response, the great Saintess offers a warm nod and turns to depart, offering a final word of encouragement. As Commander Michael respectfully accepts the command to escort her directly to the carriage, Shuana's composure completely breaks behind her quiet bow. Her carefully crafted plan to slip away under the watch of an easily distracted knight is utterly ruined, leaving her fuming in helpless, silent fury. Fuming over the great Saintess's sudden interference, Shuana silently curses her under her breath. She realizes that escaping under the watchful eye of the sharp Holy Knight commander will be infinitely harder than slipping past a low-ranking knight. As the carriage rolls through the sunlit town, an unbearable tension fills the small cabin. Sitting directly across from Commander Michael, Shuana struggles to maintain her composure, internally questioning why he chose to sit inside with her rather than ride a horse outside. Noticing her rigid posture, Michael softly asks if traveling together makes her uncomfortable. Slicing through the awkwardness with a sweet, reassuring smile, Shuana quickly claims it is much better than going alone, prompting him to ask if she understands a holy knight's true duty. Clasping his gloved hands over his lap, Michael's soft expression suddenly turns cold and intensely sharp. He plainly warns her that a holy knight does not merely protect the Saintess. They also serve as a watchdog to ensure she never runs away. Sir Michael clasps his gloved hands together inside the dim carriage, his tone carrying a sharp, quiet warning. He plainly explains that his role goes beyond guarding her honor, serving as a strict surveillance measure to ensure the Saintess never attempts to slip away from the order. Sensing the heavy weight of his words, she maintains her composure and gently counters that escape usually implies running away from somewhere awful. Michael falls silent, staring back at her with a steady glance, as her simple logic subtly challenges the temple's sacred image. Offering a polite smile to diffuse the tension, Michael's expression quickly darkens into a subtle, sinister glare. He confides that their precaution exists for a reason, citing past scandals where saintesses quietly vanished alongside their sworn knights during long journeys away from the sanctuary. The realization hits her with staggering clarity. The priests were never worried about her wandering off alone. They genuinely feared that a foolish knight like Malik would seduce her into running away with him, an absurd prospect that fills her with utter indignation. Determined to shatter any lingering suspicion, she folds her hands and vehemently argues that holy guardians engaging in secret affairs is completely preposterous. Michael rests his gloved hand against his face, observing her dramatic outburst with a calm, unreadable stare that offers no hint of his true thoughts. As the horse-drawn carriage journeys further down the winding forest road, Michael smoothly agrees with her impassioned protest. Yet a chilling edge cuts through his gentle voice as he concludes that any servant of God who betrays their sacred duty is no better than a living demon. Michael maintains his gentle smile while declaring that traitors must be relentlessly hunted down and exorcised with the holy sword. Forcing a strained laugh, she swallows her growing unease and silently wonders if she could even survive an escape attempt against such a ruthless order. Desperate to break the chilling tension, she praises his impressive rank as commander and asks if becoming a knight was always his dream. Michael reveals he was abandoned by his parents at the temple entrance as a child, prompting her to share that her own family sent her away to become a saintess. Michael fixes her with an intense gaze, asking if she has ever imagined living a life outside the priesthood. When she insists that she is currently quite happy, she gasps in playful shock, turning the question around to ask if he is dissatisfied with his own life. Michael instantly rejects the idea, asserting that his divine service is his true calling. Smiling politely, she acknowledges his status as an exemplary holy knight. Yet watching his rigid posture, she marvels at how a man barely older than her possesses such absolute faith. Staring across the carriage at her silent guardian, she privately wonders if the temple brainwashed him into unwavering obedience. A heavy quiet settles over the carriage as they travel onward through the dense forest. A few days pass in uneasy quiet until their long journey through the kingdom finally comes to an end, bringing them to a sprawling port city lit softly beneath the evening sky. As their carriage finally arrives at the coastal port city, the accompanying holy knights look around nervously, whispering amongst themselves. Stepping out into the cool night, the Saintess takes a quiet moment to enjoy the fresh ocean air, even as she notices the unsettling silence lingering over the deserted streets. Her peaceful moment breaks when Sir Michael suddenly asks if she can sense the vile, evil presence lurking in the shadows. Caught off guard for just a second, she quickly recovers her composure, spreading her arms wide to offer an immediate purification prayer for the town. Michael sternly cautions her that the shrieks of the surrounding spirits are deafening enough to shatter eardrums. Unfazed, she folds her hands together in solemn prayer and gently replies that her ears hear only the comforting voice of Lord Moandala, effortlessly maintaining her sacred image. Looking out across the sprawling, silent village, Michael warns that attempting to cleanse such a massive area is practically impossible. Refusing to step back, she takes a firm step forward, gazing into his eyes and insisting that she must do everything within her power to fulfill her sworn duty. Softening his stance, Michael instructs her to stay close and follow him out of danger, leaving the impressionable knights swooning behind them in awe. As they make their way towards shelter, she secretly celebrates delivering a top-tier performance of pure, selfless devotion. They retreat into a nearby wooden lodge, but the atmosphere instantly turns grim as the accompanying knights begin to falter. Clutching their heads and gasping in sudden pain, the men groan in distress while she watches in total bewilderment, wondering if the long travel simply exhausted them. Inside the dimly lit wooden lodge, Sir Michael gravely tells the Saintess that she may begin her divine work whenever she feels ready. Maintaining her perfectly serene demeanor, she nods respectfully and bows her head to comply. As she kneels down upon the cold floorboards, she privately reflects that Michael has been subtly testing her spiritual sight ever since their carriage journey. Resolved to shatter his lingering doubts once and for all, she clasps her hands tightly in solemn prayer, preparing to put on an unforgettable display of holy purification. Meanwhile, the heavy atmosphere inside the room turns violent as Michael draws his sword and urgently commands his squad to hold firm. But the crushing malevolent aura proves far too overwhelming, driving the groaning knights to collapse onto the floor in sudden, agonizing pain. Determined to defend his fallen allies, Michael channels his holy energy, casting a luminous spell from his outstretched palm. A brilliant blue barrier of divine magic sweeps across the lodge, temporarily shielding the incapacitated men from the evil pressure crashing down upon them. Yet before he can hold the perimeter, the protective barrier violently cracks and shatters. A hideous, red-eyed demon with a grotesque grin materializes directly over his shoulder, sending a jolt of shock through Michael as the dark specter creeps right against his neck. Driven by sharp combat instincts, Michael instantly spins around and leaps into the air. With a sudden burst of speed, he swings his glowing sword in a wide arc, launching a powerful strike straight toward the monstrous entity. Watching from the ground in total helplessness, the crippled knights look on as their commander hurls himself into a deadly battle against the dark creature, shouting his name in absolute terror. As the terrifying demonic presence threatens to overwhelm them, Sir Michael urgently commands his squad to fall back and guard the Saintess at all costs. The wounded knights collapse under the crushing dark aura, but just as all hope seems lost, a dazzling surge of sacred golden radiance suddenly erupts through the gloom. Michael looks on in absolute astonishment as the oppressive darkness instantly dissolves around them. Kneeling serene and unfazed upon the floor, the Saintess holds her hands clasped tight in solemn prayer, channeling a powerful wave of divine energy that envelops her in a magnificent multicolored halo of pure holy light. With the evil spirit completely banished and the lodge purified, she softly concludes her prayer and gracefully rises to her feet. Her immaculate white robes sweep against the floor as she steps directly toward the commander, coming to a halt just inches away before looking up to break the silence. Michael stammers in utter shock, completely breathless, as he struggles to process the unbelievable display of raw divine power unfolding before his eyes. Offering a calm and pleasant smile, Shuana softly breaks the heavy quiet, politely informing her commander that the purification prayer has been successfully completed. Standing poised and pristine inside the wooden lodge, her glowing white robes radiate an undeniable aura of sacred grace. Gazing into her calm, serene eyes, Sir Michael feels his final lingering suspicions completely melt away, arriving at the overwhelming realization that he is standing in the presence of a genuine Saintess. Under the radiant, pale glow of a full moon, the solitary carriage travels steadily along a dark, winding forest trail. Enveloped by the deep atmospheric quiet of the night, the vehicle is closely escorted by several armed knights, riding alongside on horseback, carefully navigating the shadowy woodland path beneath a vast, star-speckled sky. Inside the carriage, Shuana turns her face away in clear irritation, struggling to endure the knight commander who keeps riding directly beside her open window. Noticing her visibly strained expression and silent discomfort, he leans closer with a gentle look, thoughtfully asking if she would like to pause their journey so she can take a brief moment to rest. Though she politely accepts his offer to pause, Shuana inwardly fumes, knowing all too well that her distress stems not from physical fatigue, but from his suffocating, persistent gaze. Prompted by his loud order to the drivers, the heavy carriage wheels grind to a complete stop, and she cautiously prepares to step out into the evening air. Opening the carriage door, she finds the Knight Commander waiting expectantly with an outstretched hand and a radiant, charming smile. Thoughtfully warning her that the ground outside is damp and slippery, he offers his steady support. Shuana maintains her flawless composure, gently placing her hand in his while offering a soft, polite word of thanks as she steps down. Behind her serene, pious smile, Shuana internally marvels at his sudden shift in behavior, suspecting that her routine purification prayer somehow convinced him of her genuine, holy authority. Stepping away toward the quiet tree line, she ponders whether her acting skills have improved, secretly amused that reciting Zasic scriptures managed to deceive him so thoroughly. Hearing him address her once more, she turns back toward the carriage where the surrounding knights stand attentively in the darkness. Looking upon her quiet, elegant silhouette, the commander privately foresees her inheriting the prestigious position of Great Saintess, entirely oblivious to the fact that Shuana is desperately plotting a swift escape from them all. Pondering Shuana's astonishing holy power, Knight Commander Michael quietly wonders if her divine strength might even eclipse that of the Great Saintess herself. Startled by the audacity of his own thoughts, he quickly catches himself in shock, sternly reprimanding his lack of discipline for harboring such blasphemous doubts about the temple's highest authority. Before he can settle his troubled mind, sudden rustling in the dark forest interrupts him as a frantic, disheveled woman rushes out onto the dirt path. Collapsing onto the ground right before the surprised commander, she desperately cries out for help while two alert escort knights swiftly move in to restrain her. As Shuana steps closer to observe the commotion, Michael calmly attempts to manage the situation, instructing the distressed stranger to state her plight. Unmoved by formal protocol, the woman urgently gestures toward Shuana, begging directly for a high-ranking saintess's holy prayer rather than going through the lengthy procedures of the temple. Her desperate voice turns into a terrifying scream as she reveals that her young child went out to play and never returned home. With tears streaming down her pale, bloodshot face, her unnatural demeanor leaves the surrounding knights trembling in fear, forcing them to recoil as she kneels helplessly before Michael. Faced with her agonizing plea, Michael pauses in uneasy silence to carefully weigh his strict military duty against his personal sense of compassion. Turning back toward Shuana with a deeply conflicted look, he asks for her divine perspective on whether they should intervene. Gesturing gently toward the weeping woman, Michael asks if it would be acceptable to spare just a brief moment to assist her before continuing their journey. However, Shuana gazes back at him with mounting bewilderment, softly calling out his title while clutching her dress in silent unease. When she bafflingly asks what he and the escort knights have been doing alone in the dark foliage since earlier, Michael blinks in utter bewilderment, sweat dripping down his face as he realizes something is terribly wrong. Without warning, the frantic woman vanishes into thin air right before their eyes, leaving the surrounding knights looking around in total confusion. Sensing immediate supernatural danger, Michael turns in panic to shout for Saintess Shuana to run, entirely unaware of the horrifying presence creeping up right behind him. Before anyone can react, a terrifying shadowy apparition with glowing red eyes materializes directly behind Michael's shoulder, whispering sinister words into his ear. Shuana cries out in sheer horror as the violent dark force suddenly yanks the Knight Commander backward, slamming him onto the dirt path. Grotesque, blood-red, veined hands wrap tightly around Michael's neck, mercilessly strangling the breath out of him. While the surrounding escort knights lie unconscious on the ground, the commander struggles to stand against the malevolent entity, choking desperately as the curse tightens its deadly hold. Terrified for his life, Shuana screams at Michael to let go, begging him to snap out of it when she realizes he is strangling his own neck. Gasping for air under the dark entity's influence, Michael hears her frantic cries and wonders if the evil spirit is subjecting the Saintess to a horrific illusion. Completely drained of physical strength, Michael collapses heavily to his knees in the dark forest. As he desperately claws at his throat to remove the suffocating hands, his grip fails, causing his small sheathed dagger to slip free from his belt and clatter softly onto the ground. Hearing his choked, stammering calls for a weapon, Shuana immediately rushes forward, reaching down to pick up the fallen blade. She holds out the sheathed dagger to present it to him, only for her eyes to widen in sudden, overwhelming horror as a terrifying realization strikes her mind. As Michael violently strangles himself under the curse's suffocating grip, Shuana gazes up in utter bewilderment. Clutching the dagger tightly in her trembling hands, she struggles to comprehend the horrifying spectacle, wondering if a sinister spirit has taken complete control of the Knight Commander's body. Abruptly halting her steps in the quiet woods, a sudden realization strikes her amidst the chaos. This unexpected crisis is her golden opportunity to turn and run away. Remembering how Michael ruthlessly executed her at the stake in her past lives, she coldly reminds herself that she owes him nothing. Before she can make her escape, a chilling presence looms directly above her as dark boots hover unnaturally in the night air. A pale hand reaches through the shadowy foliage and rests firmly on Shuana's shoulder, making her gasp in shock as her heart leaps into her throat. Turning startled toward the deep voice addressing her as Saintess, Shuana meets the intense gaze of a dark-haired young man with glowing red eyes, advising her that anyone who takes up a blade must draw it. The mysterious stranger effortlessly unsheathes his own weapon with lethal grace. In a single breathtaking motion, he unleashes a powerful slash that severs the malevolent shadow entity wrapped around Michael's neck. The violent shockwave shatters the curse instantly, freeing the commander from his self-inflicted chokehold as he collapses to the dirt path, gasping and coughing black blood. With Michael lying motionless and defeated on the dirt trail, the dark-cloaked swordsman quietly asserts his dominance over the shadow-drenched clearing. Shuana remains standing beside them in stunned silence, clutching her hands to her chest as she attempts to process the overwhelming strength of this formidable warrior. Gazing up at his sharp, majestic profile in disbelief, Shuana breathlessly recognizes him as Raffle. The dark-haired young man stands completely motionless beneath the pale moonlight, turning his piercing red eyes aside in stoic silence, leaving the bewildered Saintess frozen in place on the quiet forest road. As Quiet returns to the dark forest path, Raffle stands silently beside her beneath the pale moonlight. Shuana gazes up at the formidable swordsman in utter disbelief, left breathless by his sudden and overwhelming presence. Deep within the quiet, shadowy depths of the night forest, a heavy silence settles between the two of them. With his dark cloak wrapped around him and sword drawn, he keeps a firm, watchful gaze on her, while Shuana hesitates, caught beneath his sharp, unreadable eyes. At their feet, a fallen knight groans weakly on the cold ground. Ensuring the threat is thoroughly neutralized, he delivers a harsh kick with his boot, leaving the man coughing helpless gasps as he lies defeated upon the earth. Shuana points toward the unconscious figures, her voice filled with panic as she asks if he killed them. He calmly clarifies that they are merely knocked out, though Shuana sighs in distress, struggling to make sense of how quickly the attack took place. Noticing her visible shock, he questions how a saintess who travels around performing purifications could be so entirely unaccustomed to unexpected danger. A light smirk touches his face as he teases her, mocking how a saintess could be so utterly helpless. But as a red power flares along his blade, he quickly sheathes the weapon with a sharp click. Looking back with a serious eye, he firmly warns her to keep his presence a complete secret from the straight-laced commander. Before she can reply, a thick, strange mist unexpectedly gathers beneath the full moon, casting a ghostly haze across the trees. Shuquashan turns back toward the darkness, feeling a sudden chill in the air, and anxiously calls out to ask if he is paying attention to her. Suddenly overcome by intense fear, Shuana breaks out into a terrified shriek and collapses onto her knees. She huddles close to the ground, desperately covering her mouth as she coughs in distress, tears welling up in her eyes. Shocked by her sudden breakdown, he steps forward and stoops down right beside her. Looking closely into her face, he asks in genuine confusion whether she is actually terrified of the mist, or if something sinister has possessed her mind. Trapped inside a terrifying hallucinatory haze, Shuana stammers out broken, frightened whispers beneath the dark trees. She calls out desperately for her mother and father, crying and pleading for them to take her with them, as her hand scrambles frantically across the earth until she tightly grabs hold of his ankle. Hysterical from the suffocating heat of the mist, she shrieks in horror and begs him to pull her out of the burning fire. Grabbing tightly onto his dark cloak with tears streaming down her face, she implores him to save her, leaving him utterly stunned as he clumsily attempts to pry her fingers loose. Reaching down to firmly grasp her wrist to keep her steady, a dazzling wave of holy power unexpectedly bursts forth from their contact. Bright golden light cascades around them in brilliant ripples, completely purifying the sinister mist while he stares down at her face in utter speechless wonder. As the divine light clears the oppressive air, a deep and mysterious calm spreads across the quiet forest while Shuana slumps limply toward the ground. Having endured hundreds of grueling reincarnations, he gazes at her in utter astonishment, reflecting that he has never seen the world feeling so peaceful and quiet. Shaken by the sudden, uncanny tranquility, he abruptly flicks her forehead to snap her out of her strange trance. The sharp shove sends her tumbling straight backward onto the dirt with a startled gasp, instantly bringing her dramatic distress to a sudden end. With a slight tilt of his head, he dryly asks if she is feeling better now, prompting Shuana to scowl in irritation and snap that she is wide awake thanks to his harsh shove. As she slowly pulls herself up off the ground, a long, awkward silence settles over the clearing. Trying to make sense of her dramatic reaction, he rubs his head and bluntly inquires whether her bizarre breakdown stems from being severely abused by Baron Hartwin during her childhood. Deeply offended by his ridiculous assumption, Shuana scowls and defensively retorts that her parents are not that kind of people. Shuana firmly rejects his ridiculous assumption that her parents mistreated her, even though widespread rumors across the empire claim she was locked away in an attic before being sold off to the Holy Temple. He gazes down at her with cold skepticism, completely unimpressed by her defensive denial. He mockingly points out how desperately she was clinging to his dark cloak just moments before, tauntingly asking if it was the Holy Temple that actually mistreated her instead. Shuana quickly shakes her head, insisting, stubbornly, she has no memory of such an embarrassing breakdown and claiming he must be the one haunted. When he dryly suggests she check on the fallen guards herself, Shuana rushes directly to Commander Severino's side. Kneeling beside his motionless body on the cold ground, she gasps in genuine dismay, unable to believe how easily such strong knights were rendered completely helpless against the dark forces. Clasping her hands tightly, Shuana begins desperately chanting sacred scriptures to plead for divine protection over her fallen commander. Watching her cling to useless prayers, he scoffs in bitter disappointment, convinced she is no different from every other pathetic saintess. Turning back to him with tearful eyes, Shuana anxiously asks what she should do next. Bluntly telling her to wait for the knights to regain consciousness, he instructs her to lie and claim she purified the area with her own prayers. Shuana stammers in utter confusion, protesting that she did not actually perform any miracle, but he stoops down to her level and sternly demands her complete silence. Animatedly waving her hands around in a panic, Shuana tries to remind him that he was the one who drew his sword and swiftly cut through the sinister mist. Unwilling to hear another word of credit, he harshly cuts her off and commands her to do exactly as she is told. Reaching out to forcefully grip her chin, his dark eyes flash with a lethal threat as he warns her that if the temple ever contacts him about this night, he will personally kill her. Overcome by intense fear beneath his terrifying aura, Shuana squeaks out a helpless, horror-stricken gasp. After delivering his sinister warning, the mysterious man releases his firm grip on her chin and steps back into the darkness. Shuana remains crouched on the cold ground, clutching her hands in fear. Listening as his silent footsteps fade into the quiet forest night, she nervously peeks out to ensure he is really gone. With the immediate threat gone, Shuana exhales a heavy breath of relief. She secretly congratulates herself, believing that playing the part of a foolish, incompetent saintess successfully convinced him to leave her behind. But when curiosity about his strange presence in these woods creeps into her mind, she aggressively shakes the thought away. Recalling the tragic tale of the web novel, Shuana knows that interfering in Raffles' bloody journey will only endanger her own life and prolong the plot. For her to ever survive and escape this world, the male lead must stay alive, conquer his battles, and reach the story's final conclusion without her involvement. Determined to put as much distance as possible between herself and the dangerous main characters, Shuana gathers up the heavy hem of her Saintess gown and breaks into an all-out sprint, running frantically through the dark, shadowy trees. Her desperate escape comes to a sudden, violent halt when she fails to notice the terrain beneath her feet. In her frantic rush, her boot catches forcefully on the motionless body of Commander Severino, unintentionally delivering a hard blow right to his unconscious face. A horrified gasp escapes Shuana as she completely loses her balance and pitches forward. Flailing helplessly in midair, she tumbles face first onto the ground, landing with a loud, heavy thud directly on top of her fallen guardian. Under the pale, moonlit canopy, Saintess Shuana kneels beside the unconscious commander, her heart heavy with memories of past lives. As smoke wisps around his motionless frame, she wrestles with temptation, wondering if she deserves immunity for ending the man who repeatedly burned her at the stake. Manifestation angels burst into existence around her, turning her inner conflict into a heated debate. While one echo validates her fear of being executed again, another sharply points out the truth. If she flees now, she will no longer be a runaway saintess, but a hunted, attempted murderer. A low groan breaks the stillness of the forest, instantly scattering the little angels. Realizing someone is deconsciousness far sooner than expected, panic surges through Shuana. She freezes mid-breath and steals a look behind her, caught completely off guard before she can make her escape. The recovering knight sits up, deeply relieved to find both his commander and Saintess unharmed. Seizing the opportunity, Shuana smoothly switches into character, clasping her hands with tears in her eyes as she claims to have been fervently praying to Moandala for their deliverance. Completely moved by her apparent devotion, the knights drop to their knees in solemn worship, praising her sacred mercy. Yet as they bow, Commander Michael slowly opens his eyes on the ground, casting a sharp, deliberate gaze up at the Saintess while silent awareness fills his expression. With Commander Michael finally back on his feet, the relieved knights excuse themselves to prepare for their upcoming departure, warmly urging the Saintess to sit back and rest. Leaning against a nearby rock, Michael remains silent on the forest floor, his sharp, deliberate gaze remaining firmly fixed on Shuana as she graciously acknowledges their heartfelt thanks. A sudden wave of panic hits Shuana when Michael winces and rubs the back of his neck, visibly confused by the intense, throbbing pain behind his head. Scrambling to conceal her own desperate assault, she hastily fabricates a cover story, convincing the commander that he had repeatedly struck his own head while suffering from severe shock. Leaning down tenderly, Shuana rests her hand on Michael's shoulder and offers a mesmerizing, saintly smile, softly imploring him not to struggle over agonizing memories. Yet beneath her breathtaking, pious demeanor, she inwardly panics, desperately hoping the clueless commander never realizes that she was the one who actually kicked his head. Thoroughly moved by her angelic kindness, Michael stands up straight and bows in deep reverence, offering his heartfelt gratitude to the Saintess for risking herself to protect him from evil. Shuana meets his earnest gaze with calm, practiced grace, assuring him that serving and rescuing those in need is merely her divine duty. The conversation takes an intriguing turn when Michael solemnly mentions how Saintesses have occasionally disappeared alongside holy knights during extended assignments. Hearing those words, Shuana's eyes light up with sudden inspiration, realizing that this unexpected rumor might just provide the perfect method for her own planned escape from the temple. Deciding to seize the opportunity, Shuana tears a clean strip of fabric directly from her sacred gown to treat his wound. Stepping right into Michael's personal space, she gently wraps the makeshift compress around his bruised neck, leaving the stoic commander visibly startled and completely breathless by her close, unexpectedly tender gesture. Overcome by her sudden intimacy, Commander Michael stammers in flustered protest and attempts to step back from her touch. Yet Saintess Shuana tenderly holds her ground, gently insisting on dressing his neck wound since he suffered it while protecting her from danger. Caught in her close gaze, the blushing knight nervously looks away, brushing off his injury as a simple everyday training scrape. Noticing his flushed cheeks, Shuana gasps in dramatic concern, touching her own forehead before exclaiming that he has developed a burning fever. Completely thrown off by her overwhelming presence, Michael's eyes widen in shock. He hastily adjusts his collar and steps away, stammering that he is entirely fine and will gladly handle the rest on his own. Watching him retreat in bashful embarrassment, Shuana quietly reevaluates her escape strategy. She knows that pushing a devout commander too quickly could spark suspicion and ruin her plans for freedom. To guarantee her ultimate safety, she resolves that she must play the long game, carefully orchestrating events so that Michael becomes the one to fall deeply and confess first. A sudden, pained cry breaks the quiet forest, causing Michael to turn around in immediate alarm. He finds Shuana sitting helpless on the dark ground, holding her leg after supposedly tripping in the woods. Driven by duty and concern, the knight swiftly lowers himself to his knees before the Saintess, offering to carefully check her injury. Taking her foot in his gloved hands, Michael gently presses against her ankle to locate the source of the pain. As Shuana lets out soft winces with each tender touch, the commander looks up with a troubled expression, gravely confirming that she has sprained her ankle far more severely than she realized. Before he can examine her any further, Shuana abruptly pulls her heavy skirt back down over her ankles, leaving Michael's hands suspended in mid-air. When the commander gently explains that he cannot assess the wound if she covers herself, she casts her eyes downward with a subtle blush, coyly admitting that revealing her bare legs fills her with deep embarrassment. Commander Michael gasps in mortified shock, his entire face instantly flushing bright crimson at the sheer thought of an improper touch. Driven by overwhelming embarrassment, the noble knight stammers out a panicked apology before hastily shielding his eyes and scrambling away from the Saintess in complete, flustered disarray. Shuana recoils in utter astonishment as Michael covers his eyes and frantically flees deep into the dark woods, shouting at the top of his lungs that he saw absolutely nothing. Watching him sprint away into the night, she tightly clenches her hand in bitter frustration, desperately wishing he would succumb to his natural instincts and urge them to run away together. Left sitting alone beneath the pale moonlit forest canopy, Shwasana lets out a heavy, weary sigh as she rests upon the quiet ground. She reflects bitterly on her absurd predicament, feeling utterly drained after a dozen regressions and deeply frustrated that her ultimate survival requires seducing the very commander who repeatedly burned her at the stake in past lives. Her quiet thoughts drift toward Raphael, the tragic figure who eventually laid waste to the entire empire just to force his own ultimate ruin. Trapped in an endless cycle where true progress seems impossible, she realizes with grim empathy that she finally understands the overwhelming despair that drove his dark, destructive path. Absorbed in the hopeless weight of repeating lives, Shuana exhales a quiet breath and softly remarks to the night air how pitiful it all truly is. But before her words can fade into the forest stillness, a sharp, unexpected voice suddenly echoes across the clearing, demanding to know exactly who she is calling pitiful. Stunned, Shuana turns toward a nearby moonlit pool, her breath catching as she gazes down into the luminous water. Resting inside the spring is Raphael himself, his dark hair damp and his striking crimson eyes gleaming with subtle amusement as he turns a muscular, shirtless torso back toward the startled Saintess. Standing in the glowing water, Raphael looks toward the Saintess with cold calm and softly speaks her name. Unexpectedly confronting the tragic figure face to face, Shuana freezes as their eyes lock in the moonlit forest. High above the secluded forest clearing, Saintess Shuana crouches nervously near the edge of a hidden spring. Her quiet solitude is shattered when a deep voice echoes up from the luminous water, calling out her name directly before she can slip away undetected into the shadowy night. Wading through the moonlit pool, the dark-haired man turns toward her with a striking, amused smirk. Standing tall without a single hint of bashfulness, he casually rests his hand on his hip and teasingly asks if watching unsuspecting men take a bath has become her newest secret hobby. Utterly mortified by the sudden spectacle, Shuana panics and shrieks at the top of her lungs, wildly telling him to shield his eyes and cover his bare chest. Perplexed by her frantic outburst, he steps closer, but her desperate backward shuffle causes her heel to slip on the rough ground. Flailing her arms in vain, Shuana tumbles flat on her back with an undignified thud, letting out a sharp groan of defeat. As her embarrassed muttering echoes through the surrounding brush, he steps barefoot out of the glowing water, staring down at her crumpled form in complete quiet exasperation. Rubbing her aching ankle on the forest floor, Shuana grumbles bitterly to herself, wondering if this painful tumble is karma for faking an injury earlier. Meanwhile, he smoothly slips into a dark shirt, gazing down at her with a cool expression while questioning why she remains alone in the dark woods. Quietly relieved to see he is unharmed, Shuana attempts to save face by insisting their meeting was purely accidental. Before she can pull herself up, a large hand reaches down into her view. Bathed in the soft moonlight, he looks down, telling her to stop muttering to herself and stand up. Towering over her in the dim clearing, he keeps his palm outstretched. Yet Shuana glares back with dark suspicion, hesitating to take it. Exasperated by her stubborn distrust, he closes his eyes with a weary sigh, grabs her arm directly and forcefully pulls her upright, catching her completely off guard. Glaring fiercely up at him, Shuana angrily insists that she can stand on her own, swatting his hand away while he calmly observes her foul mood. When she bitterly grumbles about being lectured by a pervert who bathes naked in the forest, he smirks with cool amusement, teasing that it takes one to know one, especially when she is the girl trying everything to seduce a holy knight. Stunned by his sharp accusation, Shuana stammers out a flustered denial, but his crimson eyes narrow as he ominously reveals that the swarming ghosts around her are spilling all her deepest secrets. As dark, grinning phantoms materialize out of the shadows, utter shock washes over Shuana at the realization that he actually sees evil spirits. Unbothered by her astonishment, he coolly adds that the loud ghosts won't stop shouting about how she should tempt the prudish knight. He leans over her with a mocking smirk, mockingly asking if a devout saintess is even permitted to harbor feelings for a holy knight while breaking holy rules. Shuana goes quiet for a brief, tense moment, only to suddenly explode into an excited frenzy. Closing the distance, she lunges forward and grabs his shirt, aggressively demanding that he tell her every single detail of what the spirits are saying. Staggering back slightly under her sudden aggression, he stares down at her in complete disbelief, questioning if she is truly that serious about that night. Completely unfazed, Shuana points her finger right at his chest, threatening to spread scandalous rumors that he is an outdoor exhibitionist if he refuses to cooperate. His brow twitches in intense irritation at her shameless blackmail. Exasperated, he rubs his forehead with a heavy sigh, muttering that he completely misjudged just how crazy she is. Seeing his guard drop, Shuana eagerly bargains, promising to keep both his ghost-seeing ability and his secret bathing habits safe if he just reveals the phantom's words. Running a hand through his dark hair, he stands completely exhausted by her persistent begging under the moonlit canopy. Overwhelmed by her unrelenting badgering, the dark-haired man rubs his temples with a weary sigh and reluctantly passes along the spirit's advice, revealing they suggested she simply smile and react warmly whenever making eye contact with the knight. Eager for more, Shuana aggressively grabs his shirt, demanding to know the exact way she should smile. Striking an exaggerated pose with her fingers pressed cutely against her cheeks, Shuana flashes a bright, overly dramatic grin to test out the look. He stares back in deadpan, unamused silence, his jaw tightening in complete exasperation before he decides he has had enough of her absurd shenanigans. Shouting angrily after his retreating figure as he strolls into the dark forest, Shuana vows to never cross paths with such an uncooperative man again. Yet the moment his shadow vanishes into the night, a quiet sigh of relief escapes her chest as she resolves to put the ghost's advice to the test. Before she can catch her breath, a sharp, stern voice shatters the quiet night, freezing her in place. Emerging from the moonlit path, the handsome blonde holy knight, Commander Michael, approaches with a cold gaze, admitting he has spent a long time scouring the dark woods searching for her. Flustered by his sudden arrival, Shuana laughingly offers a quick excuse about taking a peaceful stroll by the water, but Michael steps directly into her space to cut her off. He sternly reminds her that a saintess is strictly forbidden from acting independently outside the temple walls. Smirking through her growing tension, Shuana daringly asks if he expects her to run away, while secretly mocking her own foolish plan to seduce a commander who would happily execute her. Michael stares back at her with an unyielding, piercing gaze, entirely unmoved by her provocative smirk. Deflecting his suspicion, Shuana suddenly shifts to intense outrage, angrily demanding to know if he considers the Saintess to be nothing more than his prisoner. Gripping her holy pendant tightly against her chest, she yells at him for backing her into a corner and suffocating her every move. Michael sternly maintains that he is only trying to protect her from the dangers outside the temple, not keep her as a prisoner. Stepping forward with rising indignation, Shuana fiercely retorts that he feels like the ultimate threat when he casually threatens to cut her down. She directly challenges his authority, demanding to know where holy scriptures ever sanctioned hunting down those who simply desired a free life. When Michael coldly answers that holy law commands the punishment of evil, Shuana pushes back without hesitation, demanding who gave him such absolute authority. She aggressively asks if great Saintess Moandala herself decreed it, causing Michael's golden eyes to narrow in sharp, dangerous irritation as tension fills the clearing. Resting his gloved hand heavily against his sword hilt, Michael coldly speaks her full title. Looming over her, he barely observes that she looks like someone who has entirely forsaken God. Surrounded by a sinister aura, he chillingly suggests she must have been possessed by an evil spirit during her solitary night walk. Shuana's eyes widen in absolute horror as the gravity of her reckless temper sets in. Shuffling backward in a flurry of panic, she bitterly curses herself for dropping her guard and provoking such a dangerous commander. Desperation turns into outright terror when Michael begins pulling his sword from its sheath, stepping forward under the pale moonlight as if preparing for immediate execution. Realizing her life is on the line, Shuana instantly pivots tactics, clutching her chest dramatically and asking if he truly fails to see why she craves freedom. Even as Michael coldly warns that her desperate tricks will not work, she clasps her hands tightly over her heart with a pained, mournful expression, pouring every ounce of emotion into her performance. With unwavering focus, Shuana loudly proclaims that Michael Severino himself is the sole reason her faith is being tested so severely. Caught completely off guard by her sudden, passionate outburst, the stern commander stands completely stunned in silence, his hand slowly easing away from his drawn weapon. Under the cool blue glow of the midnight forest, Shuana stands just a few paces away from the imposing knight commander. Michael fixates his golden eyes upon her in heavy, unreadable silence, leaving the air between them thick with tension and uncertainty. Clutching her hands tightly against her chest, Shuana swallows hard and nervously holds her breath, frantically questioning whether her sudden, shameless confession attack was actually enough to startle him into submission. Lifting a gloved hand to his forehead in visible discomfiture, Michael finally breaks the heavy atmosphere by calling her title. With his usual stoic composure entirely shattered, he flusteredly turns his gaze aside and stiffly announces that he will pretend he never heard her passionate words. Before she can offer any explanation, the commander stammers out a flustered goodbye and quickly retreats into the dark woods, hurrying away from her as fast as his legs can carry him. Shuana sways back slightly and lets out a long, shuddering sigh of pure relief, marveling at the fact that she somehow survived the immediate encounter. Yet her relief is short-lived as a grim reality sinks back in. She knows that if she steps foot back inside the temple, Michael will pray for divine forgiveness, realize he was utterly duped by her absurd performance, and ruthlessly hunt her down the second he regains his senses. Determined not to wait around for her own execution, Shuana decides that her days of playing the obedient, gentle Saintess are officially over. She gathers up the heavy hem of her sacred white dress into her hands, turns away from the temple, and charges recklessly into the forbidden forest. Throwing caution to the wind, she runs blindly through the thick brush, desperate to put as much distance between herself and the holy city as humanly possible. However, after endless hours of sprinting through the moonlit wilderness, her frantic flight comes to a bewildering halt when she stumbles across a familiar tree trunk bound tightly with a white cloth marker. Placing her hands on her hips in complete exhaustion and exasperation, Shuana stares at the tree in utter defeat. She realizes with dread that she has been running in frantic circles the entire night, trapped inside the dark woods. Exhausted from running endlessly in frantic circles through the woods, Shuana sways heavily against a marked tree trunk as thirst and severe leg pain take their toll on her body. Just as complete defeat begins to take over, the faint, distinct sound of a rushing stream catches her attention, instantly lighting up her face with a sudden burst of hope. Reasoning that following the water downhill will eventually lead her safely off the mountain and away from a terrible death, she gathers her remaining strength and charges forward. Clutching her sacred star necklace tightly against her chest, she tearfully calls out for her mother and father as she sprints blindly through the moonlit wilderness. The sound of the rushing stream stirs vivid memories of her original life as Dahai back on Earth, taking her back to a sunny outing at Gali shortly after her adoption. While watching other families enjoy the clear water, her young eyes caught sight of a child who had stumbled and fallen hard onto the grass. Without a second thought, young Dahai hurried over to offer her hand and lift him up, earning glowing praise from her adoptive parents for helping a complete stranger. Hearing them call her an admirable, kind child brought a radiant smile to her face, making her feel truly happy and deeply valued inside. That soft reputation for being the most mature and kind child at the care center was what brought her adoptive parents into her life in the first place. She vividly remembers the unforgettable day they visited the facility, gently introducing themselves with warm smiles before asking if she would consider living with them as family. Having repeatedly heard other adults say she was already 6 years old and had missed the right time to be adopted, young Dahai hesitatingly shared her inner fears with them. Yet the couple gently brushed her worries aside, warmly assuring her that 6 was actually the perfect age for the child they had always wanted. Overwhelmed with emotion as her new father knelt down to wrap her in a tight, protective embrace, Dahai nervously asked if she could truly be their daughter. Holding her tiny hand tightly in theirs, they lovingly affirmed their decision, welcoming her into their hearts and family with open arms and complete warmth. They welcomed young Dahi into their family with open arms and complete devotion, proudly placing a framed photo of her radiant smile right on their wall. For a lonely child who had spent years dreading that she was unadoptable, calling them her mother and father filled her heart with boundless warmth, convincing her that she had finally found a safe and permanent home. Yet that sweet dream shattered the evening her mother unexpectedly fell pregnant. Peeking through the cracked doorway, Dahi watched them tearfully embrace over the positive test, hearing them joyfully declare that the three of them would now be a family forever. In that agonizing instant, she realized with a sickening chill that she was never truly counted as one of their own. The painful memory violently snaps Shuana back into reality as she recoils in shock, slamming her back hard against the rough tree trunk. Collapsing onto the forest floor in complete exhaustion, she stares up at the familiar white cloth marker in sheer disbelief, realizing with mounting dread that the faint sound of rushing water had tricked her into running in circles around the woods once again. Listening more closely to the woods, her blood runs cold as the trickling sound turns out to be crimson blood droplets pooling on the ground. A sinister, spectral voice giggles maniacally right behind her head, asking if she is leaving. Pure terror surges through her veins, forcing her to scramble to her feet and bolt recklessly deeper into the dark forest. Throughout all her years posing as a holy saintess across the empire, she had never once encountered a genuine ghost, leaving her completely unequipped for the supernatural horror now chasing her. She charges frantically through the moonlit wilderness in a desperate attempt to escape, but her worn-out shoes suddenly lose traction, sending her tumbling head over heels down the steep slope. Battered, exhausted, and gasping for air on the damp ground, Shuana struggles up onto her knees as panic completely takes control. Clutching her head tightly between her hands, she squeezes her eyes shut and frantically screams at the top of her lungs, desperately begging the terrifying forest ghost to get lost and leave her in peace once and for all. Clutching her head in utter bewilderment, Shuana freezes as the supposed phantom's harsh, condescending words echo through the night air with an oddly familiar tone of arrogance. Parting the dense, moonlit foliage, she cautiously steps through the thick bushes, loudly questioning whether her frantic running in circles through the dark woods could truly be blamed on her. Stepping into the moonlit clearing, she encounters a tall young man clad in a dark cloak with a sword strapped at his waist, who sneers and rudely commands her to get lost. Gasping in utter astonishment as she takes in his sharp profile, Shuana's paralyzing terror instantly vanishes, replaced by complete and overwhelming shock. As his striking red eyes widen in complete surprise, the Dark Knight flinches back at her sudden shift in demeanor. Refusing to let him slip away into the dark, Shuana throws her arms wide open and recklessly lunges forward through the night air, screaming out the name Raffle Winters at the absolute top of her lungs. Slamming right against his dark cloak, she catches the formidable swordmaster entirely unawares, causing Raffle to stammer in flustered confusion over why on earth she hasn't fled the mountain yet. Completely ignoring his bewildered outburst, Shuana reaches up and forcefully grabs hold of his hands, holding on to him with an unyielding, desperate grip. Under the brilliant glow of the full moon shining over the woodland canopy, Shuana looks up at him with immense, tearful relief, profoundly grateful that her terrifying ghost turned out to be a living person. Surrounding their feet, soft yellow blossoms sway in the midnight breeze as Raffle remains rooted to the spot, completely frozen by her sudden, unexpected touch as their hands remain tightly locked together. Desperate for safety, she reaches out and clings tightly to Count Winters, pleading frantically for his assistance. But he reflexively pulls back from her touch, questioning if she was just talking to ghosts. Staring down at her with utter confusion, he grumbles about a stranger making bizarre noises. She blinks in silence, completely caught off guard by his cold reaction. As she hesitantly utters Count Winter's name, her fingers begin to slip away from his coat. But before she can retreat, his hand suddenly clamps down around her wrist, stopping her in her tracks. Holding her fast in the quiet night, he commands her to remain right there so he can take a moment to process what is happening between them. They stand frozen together beneath the brilliant glow of the full moon, while flower petals drift across the dark woods. Count Winters softly remarks that the wind is blowing around them. She looks up at him with a startled expression, pointing out awkwardly that it naturally smells of grass, given that they are surrounded by the forest. He lowers his head as a quiet calm settles over the woods, noting aloud how peaceful it feels while a faint smile touches his lips. Watching his unreadable expression, she nods back uncertainly. She tries to make sense of his strange demeanor, wondering if he is lost in his own thoughts or truly communing with unseen spirits. Suddenly, his sharp red eye fixes upon her with intense scrutiny as he bluntly asks who she really is. When she falters and stammers that she is a Saintess, he snaps back that he isn't asking for her title. Feeling the heavy tension while he maintains his tight grip on her hands, she smiles nervously and begs him to let go so they can speak properly. Still pinning her wrists in a firm hold, Count Winters demands to know who she truly is beneath her sacred title. But before Shuana can even attempt to respond, a cold shadow falls over them as a silent third figure watches their confrontation from the tree line. Stepping out from the dark forest, the Knight Commander confronts them directly. He sternly calls out Saintess Shuana, warning her that fleeing the holy grounds and contacting a dangerous outsider without authorization are severe felonies. Shuana stammers frantically, attempting to explain that their midnight encounter in the woods was nothing more than an unexpected accident. But her excuses fall on deaf ears as the commander turns his cold, unforgiving gaze toward Count Winters, who still holds her fast. The commander orders Count Winters to release the Saintess immediately. Instead of complying, the Count smiles dangerously and taunts him, asking if he intends to drag her back only to burn her at the stake as a witch. A wild provocation that leaves Shuana utterly horrified. Unsheathing his gleaming sword, the Knight Commander threatens to execute Count Winters in the divine name. He chillingly adds that Shuana faces the very same fate for deserting her sacred duties, callously declaring that she can no longer be considered a holy Saintess. Count Winters bursts into a dark laugh, mocking the commander for intending to murder her either way. Reaching for his own hilt, he boldly taunts the commander by declaring that the holy temple of Moandala was constructed atop a mountain of corpses. Biting his lip in pure fury over the blasphemy, the commander charges forward, swinging his divine blade to cut them down. Count Winters swiftly draws his sword and pulls Shuana tightly against his body, stepping forward to withstand the lethal strike. With a powerful clash of steel, Count Winters effortlessly parries the Knight Commander's furious strike while holding Shuana tightly against his body. Caught in the middle of their deadly confrontation, she frantically begs him to put her down before he continues fighting, but he grips her fast while keeping his opponent at bay. Wearing a dangerous, taunting smirk, Count Winters suddenly kicks out with incredible speed, striking the Knight Commander directly in the chest and launching him into the air. The commander tumbles backward and lands heavily on the forest floor, struggling to push himself back up as dust settles around them. Drawing Shuana close to his chest, Count Winters calmly reasons that killing a high-ranking commander right here would bring endless trouble, warning that hordes of temple fanatics would chase them down relentlessly. Shuana nervously admits he is right while the injured commander glares at them with fury from the ground. As Shuana swallows nervously and wonders if this chaotic situation is still salvageable, Count Winters holds her hand and firmly vows that he won't let the temple drag her away. Surrounded by a gentle haze of flower petals, he looks into her eyes and softly asks if she is afraid of fire. Shuana stares at him in complete bewilderment, struggling to comprehend his bizarre question. As the commander lunges forward once again, Count Winters parries the blade while remarking that starting over would be better, telling her not to be scared because there will definitely be a next time. Before Shuana can make sense of his cryptic words, Count Winters suddenly disengages and vanishes into the darkness of the woods. The Knight Commander is left standing stunned in the quiet clearing, leaving Shuana standing alone beneath the bright full moon, utterly bewildered by the Count's abrupt escape. Smirking down at her with cool detachment, Count Winters leaps backward into the abyss, bidding the Saintess a calm farewell as he plunges into the dark forest below. Horror washes over Shuana as she watches him fall away. She reaches out into the quiet night, screaming his name in desperate panic before everything shatters around her. Shuana snaps awake with a sudden gasp, her heart pounding frantically as she clutches the collar of her nightgown. Bright morning light floods her quiet bedroom while another priestess enters, loudly scolding her for slacking on her daily cleaning duties. Sitting frozen on her bed, Shuana stares ahead in absolute bewilderment. As her roommate accuses her of faking sick, Shuana pieces together the terrifying mechanics of her endless loop. Whenever Count Winters dies, she is automatically dragged back through time alongside him like a package deal. Realizing she has returned to a previous save point, she leaps out of bed and pushes past her friend. Seething with anger that his reckless death destroyed the timeline where she had managed to survive the longest, Shuana races barefoot through the sacred temple halls. She ignores the shocked glares and scandalized whispers of passing priests as she makes a desperate beeline for the night training grounds. Spotting an unsuspecting trainee knight named Sir Malik, Shuana charges across the courtyard, grabs him by the sleeve, and forcefully slams him against a stone wall. The startled knight gasps in total shock, dropping his wooden practice sword as she corners him with an intensely desperate glare. Determined to alter her tragic destiny and flee the holy grounds before disaster strikes again, Shuana dramatically screams a wild confession of love, begging Sir Malik to run away with her immediately. Her frantic proposals echoes through the blossom-draped courtyard, leaving the entire audience frozen in sheer disbelief. Reflecting on the chaotic events of the previous loop, Shuana realizes that getting lost in the dark mountains forced Count Winters into his suicidal gamble. She fumes over his arrogant assumption that she enjoys these endless time-traveling resets, refusing to let his reckless self-destruction control her fate. Driven by her overwhelming desire to break free from the sacred temple and return to her worried parents, Shuana takes her destiny into her own hands. Boarding a ship bound for distant shores, she clings tightly to the arm of her newly recruited knight while their vessel cuts across the open sea. While the unsuspecting knight smiles brightly, utterly delighted by what he believes is a spontaneous, romantic elopement, Shuana stares ahead with cold, unwavering resolve. She remains fiercely determined to navigate this reset on her own terms, clinging to the hope that her family is still waiting for her return. Before the holy stigmata could be branded onto her hand, her scheme to charm a gullible knight and escape the temple succeeded completely. Now, over a month into their quiet ocean voyage, she smiles placidly while he chatters away on deck, privately resolving to abandon him the moment they reach land so she can lay low until the story reaches its end. Her composure falters when Malik affectionately calls her darling, asking to hear every detail of her past so they can share their future lives together. Knowing nothing about the original Saintess's history beyond vague rumors, she offers a polite smile to mask her irritation, realizing his starry, eager devotion leaves her with no choice but to invent a tragic backstory on the spot. Adopting a soft, lonely expression, she fabricates a tale of childhood solitude, claiming she felt like a princess trapped inside a high tower. She tells him how she passed the long days drawing alone, taking comfort in the gentle fantasy that a gallant hero would eventually arrive to rescue her from her isolation. Leaning thoughtfully against the wooden railing, she adds with a bittersweet smile that she occasionally hoped the birth parents who abandoned her would return for her. Malik leans in sympathetically, asking if she means Baron Hartwan's family who left her at the temple, and she softly confirms it right before a sudden flash disrupts them. A deafening roar shatters the quiet ocean atmosphere as a cannon shell strikes the water right beside their ship, spraying high waves over the deck. Panicked crewmen leap down the stairs, shouting that a massive galleon is firing upon them, though luckily the opening blast missed its mark. With Malik quickly shielding her in his arms, she grips his tunic and despairs over her good fortune running out so fast. The crew fears an attack by pirates, but as a sharp, familiar voice calls out her name across the open sea, her blood runs cold at the sight of a massive dark warship closing in. Count Winters leaps directly onto the deck of the passenger vessel, his sharp crimson eyes sweeping the frightened crew as he demands they hand over Shuana immediately. Shuana recoils in sheer panic and utter disbelief. Recognizing the infamous war hero, she wonders why he would abandon his own grand title inauguration ceremony just to hunt her down across the open sea. With his massive dark warship looming right alongside their passenger vessel, Winters approaches the crew to specify that he is looking for a young woman with long violet silver hair. Crouching out of sight behind a stack of hay bales, a terrified Malik whispers to ask if the terrifying noble is hunting her, but Shuana desperately shushes him to keep quiet. Winters calls out across the open deck, ominously warning that his keen senses allow him to pinpoint her exact hiding spot behind the cargo. Realizing the mischievous spirit snitched on her location, Shuana angrily scolds the invisible ghosts before instructing Malik to stay hidden, reluctantly stepping out into the open to face the formidable Count by herself. Reaching out an open hand, Winters sternly scolds Shuana for landing herself in trouble mere days after vanishing from the temple. The bewildered ship captain interjects to explain that she boarded the vessel under the claim of traveling with her husband, prompting Winters to break into a cruel, mocking laugh at the absurdity of the lie. Refusing to stand by, Malik foolishly steps forward to declare their profound love, shouting at the intruder that he will never surrender her to a stranger. Shuana's eyes widen in sheer panic as she grabs his sleeve, frantically pleading with her overly earnest protector not to push his luck or provoke the lethal commander any further. A look of intense irritation washes over Winters as he assumes Shuana only snuck onto the ship to escape the knight's overbearing presence. Running a hand through his messy dark hair, he shatters their cover entirely, exposing to the stunned crew that a runaway Saintess and a rogue knight who fled the temple are merely pretending to be married. Outraged to discover that a Saintess who turned her back on God has boarded their vessel, the crew reacts with fierce hostility. Shuana anxiously scolds Malik for exposing their true identity, but even as she begs the angry sailors to hear them out, the mob refuses to listen. Deaf to her desperate pleas, the aggressive crew violently restrains Shuana and overpowers Malik. As the knight struggles in their grip, the sailors hoist him off his feet and prepare to cast him off the deck. Horror strikes as Malik is thrown headfirst into the open sea with a heavy splash. Shuana watches in stunned disbelief while held tightly by the sailors, tormented by the realization that those around her are suffering simply because she fled. Stepping forward through the commotion, Count Winters extends his hand, sternly telling her to drop her stubbornness and surrender. But Shuana's eyes burn with fierce defiance as she steps back, declaring that she will never follow him anywhere. When Winters mockingly asks where she could possibly escape to on a ship surrounded by ocean, Shuana makes a dramatic choice. She sprints across the wooden deck and leaps over the railing, plunging directly into the cold sea below. Stunned by her immediate and reckless dive, Winters curses in frustration and leaps across the deck toward the edge. He grips the wooden barrier and peers anxiously into the white foam and churning waves where she vanished. Desperation breaking his composure, Winters barks urgent orders at his crew to lower the sails, halt the vessel, and pull her out of the water. Yet when a crewman refuses to save a Saintess who chose death, Winters grips the ledge and curses in helpless fury. Refusing to let the runaway Saintess drown in the open sea, Count Winters swiftly strips off his dark tunic while standing at the ship's edge. Without a single second of hesitation, the formidable war hero leaps over the railing and dives straight into the churning ocean waters below. Plunging deep beneath the surface, Winters cuts through the freezing sea while white bubbles swirl around his descending body. As he sinks further into the cold blue ocean, ominous dark shadows begin gathering around his chest, echoing the sinister power tied to his endless rebirths. Opening his sharp crimson eyes underwater, Winters glares through the turbulent currents, searching the sea for any sign of her. High above, near the illuminated surface, he finally spots Shuana's motionless body floating helplessly inside her heavy dark cloak, drifting further away into the ocean. Surfacing with Shuana tightly cradled against his bare chest, Winters frantically shakes her unconscious body above the waves. He shouts her name into the wind, desperately begging her to open her eyes and breathe, before cursing in helpless agony as her wet head rests limply on his shoulder. Clinging to her still form amidst the rolling waves, a bitter truth weighs heavily on his mind. He realizes that if this Saintess dies, his life will end up no different than all his previous failed regressions, leaving him with no choice but to lose everything and start over. As he sinks deeper back into the ocean depths, dark crimson aura pulses violently around his submerged body. Far beneath his bare feet, countless demonic shadow hands rise up from the murky seabed, stretching outward to grab him and drag him down into the red abyss. even as ghostly red hands coil tightly around his neck and chest. Winters stares forward with calm, heavy resignation. He quietly accepts that if this timeline crumbles today, he will simply have to be more careful in his next regression, facing the endless cycle one more time. After ending another tedious life repeated far too many times to count, a new regression begins beneath the pouring rain. Returning to an unspecified point in the past, a local blacksmith named Ethan steps outside his shop and pauses in surprise upon finding an unexpected crate abandoned in the storm. Inside the wet container lies a newborn infant with striking red eyes, left completely exposed to the elements. A fresh, painful scar carved into his small arm spells out the name Raffle, leaving Ethan horrified that anyone could do such a terrible thing to a newborn baby. Deciding to take the infant in, Ethan lifts the basket from the rubble and offers to bring him to his house. Though Ethan barely manages to run his blacksmith shop under meager circumstances, he carries the child through the heavy rain and into his home. His wife, Maria, greets them with intense distaste, angrily yelling that she will not lay a single finger on the boy. Whenever Ethan is away, Maria constantly neglects and abuses young Raffle, leaving him isolated on the wooden floor to quietly eat hard bread. Maria finds the boy's quiet demeanor creepy, scolding him for never crying or laughing despite her harsh treatment. Enduring these dull childhood years, Raffle eventually approaches Ethan in the kitchen when that crucial day arrives, asking him politely not to drink alcohol today. Raffle warns that Ethan might fall and injure his leg, but the adult dismisses the child's strange advice. Without fail, the same tragic accident repeats every single time as Ethan stumbles in the street directly before the path of an oncoming horse carriage. Refusing to give up, Raffle keeps trying in every repeated life to alter the fateful outcome. As another loop begins, a slightly older Raffle looks at Ethan with quiet determination, instructing him to go out today and not return home. Hoping to break an unending cycle of tragedy, young Raffle earnestly cautions Ethan against sleeping out on the open streets, remembering how ruthless bandits murdered the blacksmith during a previous life loop. As Ethan limps away towards safety, Maria angrily scolds the quiet boy for neglecting his household chores, yet Raffle remains silently resolved to alter their cruel destiny. Dark crows gather ominously atop the wooden beams of a collapsed roof as desperate cries for help echo from beneath the heavy debris. Returning to the horrific scene, Ethan falls to his knees in utter heartbreak, frantically digging at the wreckage after realizing his family was brutally ambushed by robbers and buried under the ruined structure. Covered in blood and clutching a wooden club, Raffle staggers back toward the ruin and quietly confesses he tried to subdue the attackers from behind, but his young body lacked the physical strength. Overwhelmed by unbearable grief and rage, Ethan violently grabs Raffle by the collar, demanding to know why the boy saved only him while leaving his family to die. Screaming heartbreaking curses through tears of agony, Ethan bitterly denounces the boy as a demon and regrets not heeding his wife's warnings. In his reckless hysteria, the blacksmith suddenly loses his footing on the cracked ground, stumbling backward while pulling on Raffle's shirt, just as a heavy wooden crate suspended above breaks loose and plummets downward. The heavy wooden structure crushes Ethan instantly beneath the rubble, breaking his prosthetic leg as blood pools across the earth. Standing motionless in the silence, Raffle softly offers an apology to Ethan Winters, reflecting back on a peculiar Saintess he met and quietly confessing that he never anticipated the man dying from such a sudden accidental fall. Wiping blood from his bruised face following Ethan's tragic death, Raffle quietly vows to try a completely different approach to save the blacksmith when he next returns to this starting point. Turning away from the crushed body laying beneath the heavy debris, he notes that arriving at this particular time is rare, leaving him with many crucial preparations to make for the life ahead. Years pass, shifting the scene to a sunlit morning at a grand noble estate, where a cautious maid opens the entrance door to inspect an unannounced guest. Standing before her is Raffle, now fully grown into a striking knight commander adorned in the dark, immaculate uniform of Marquis Baker's order. He offers a gentle smile while requesting an audience with Baron Hartwan, sending the startled servant hurrying back inside. Waiting gracefully out in the sunshine, Raffle listens as loud, chaotic shouting echoes from inside the house. He overhears the Baron and Baroness erupting into a bitter, embarrassing argument over their past affairs and the unwanted daughter they heartlessly discarded at a temple, causing the composed commander to let out a quiet, disgusted sigh. Deciding not to waste any more time outside, Raffle opens the door and interrupts their ridiculous argument with a sudden greeting. Offering a dignified bow, he formally introduces himself as Commander Raffle Winters. Completely stunned by his imposing aura, Baron Frank Hartwan and his wife Trudy struggle to hide their embarrassment while offering a nervous welcome. When the Baron eagerly inquires what business brought such an esteemed military leader to their humble house, Raffle states his true purpose without a single moment of hesitation. Maintaining a calm yet resolute gaze, he directly asks for the Baron's official permission to marry the very daughter they cast out and abandoned at the temple. Explaining that someone bound to the temple cannot easily leave without sincere familial persuasion, Raffle reaches into his uniform and presents a velvet chest. Opening it reveals a glittering hoard of rare jewels, instantly mesmerizing the greedy noble couple with its unbelievable wealth. As the greedy Baron attempts to demand even more payment for his daughter, Raffle smoothly pulls out an exquisite diamond brooch and offers it directly to the father. Overwhelmed by sheer avarice, both parents ecstatically accept the bribe, promising to retrieve her at once. Reflecting on how naive the young Saintess had been regarding her birth parents, Raffle maintains a cool, composed posture as he agrees to wait for her return, confident that his plan is unfolding precisely as intended. A lavish carriage pulls up to the temple gates as the Baroness hurries inside to locate the daughter she once abandoned. Rushing past the guard post, she dramatically embraces the silver-haired girl, leaving the broom-holding Saintess completely bewildered by this sudden maternal display. Though suspicious of parents she has never seen before, Shuana decides to follow them after realizing the temple guards allowed them inside. She marvels in secret at the mysterious commander, who offered such immense wealth for her hand without ever meeting her face to face. Dressed in a clean gown, Shuana steps gracefully into the estate drawing room, fully prepared to express her heartfelt gratitude for being rescued from temple life. But the moment her gaze meets the handsome knight commander sitting calmly before her, her face freezes in sheer, unadulterated horror. Instantly recognizing Raffle as her persistent stalker, Shuana screams in absolute terror and points an accusing finger at him. Before her outraged parents can even react to her unrefined language, she spins around and sprints at top speed down the long estate corridor, desperate to escape. As her outraged father fumes over her unrefined escape, Raffle politely excuses himself from the room and pursues the fleeing Saintess outside. Shuana desperately sprints through the garden, cursing the crazy stalker who refuses to let her live in peace. Effortlessly matching her panicked stride, the high-ranking commander calmly advises her not to waste her strength needlessly. Before she can even comprehend his absurd speed, his strong hand swiftly reaches out and grabs her garment. Lifting the thrashing Saintess like a piece of luggage, Raffle promises to release her only if she agrees to follow quietly. He carries her straight past her baffled parents, casually assuring the pair that he will arrange the marriage himself. With a cold smirk, Raffle mocks the noble's sudden concern for propriety. Reminding them how callously they locked away and abandoned their child at a temple, he vows to give her a far happier life while sternly warning them never to interfere with his wife again. Inside the quiet cottage room, she sits across from him with her arms crossed, confronting him directly about his intentions. She demands to know why he is so determined to marry her after spending so long carefully setting the stage. Looking back with a calm, unbothered posture, he asks if revealing his motives will finally convince her to stop running away. Fixing his intense gaze upon her, he plainly admits that he needs her. Even if he must endure this god-forsaken regression over and over again, he is fully determined to keep her by his side. Stunned by the sheer weight of his relentless obsession, she recoils in shock at his unhinged declaration. Without denying his dark nature, he steps forward and delivers a chilling warning. If she attempts to escape through death, he will simply chase her down into the next life. As a dark aura, heavy with tension, surrounds them, he looms directly over her chair, leaving her completely cornered. Despite his intimidating presence, she stands her ground, firmly stating that she has no desire to be involved with him or live by his side. Leaning over bitterly, he taunts her by asking if she loved the holy knight who drowned because of him. She turns her eyes sharply on him, berating his trash personality. Sitting back, he scoffs and accuses her of playing with men's hearts, demanding to know who she plans to fall in love with next. When she angrily replies that it will never be him, he chillingly vows to murder anyone she runs away with and drag her right back to his side. Recognizing that fleeing now will only lead to another endless cycle of regression, she shifts her strategy entirely. She decisively crosses her legs and faces her prospective groom head-on. Maintaining her calm composure, she demands to know the exact reason he needs her and whether her presence purifies the ghosts lingering around him. When she asks whether her presence purifies the ghosts around him, Raffle coldly corrects her. Evil spirits are never cleansed, only locked away. Each time he slashes down an enemy, their horrific curses and the stench of rotting corpses become trapped inside his dark blade, where their vengeful screams echo forever. Asking if those monstrosities actually speak to him, she watches his jaw clench in bitter anguish. He reveals that the spirits crave nothing but bloodshed and aren't just sealed within his weapon. They are scattered everywhere, forcing him into a cursed cycle of dying and coming back to life endlessly. Bound by an eternal curse driven by restless souls, he clenches his trembling hands as his red eyes narrow in torment. He warns that she cannot hear the malevolent phantoms hovering around them at this very moment, leaving her completely oblivious to the terror that constantly surrounds him. As an ominous red aura flares up around him, his mind begins to slip into dangerous madness. Bowing his head under the overwhelming pressure of the ghost voices, he violently vows to slaughter every single entity whispering inside his head. Refusing to let him succumb to his dark frenzy, she acts without hesitation. Reaching out, she firmly takes his hands into hers, causing a brilliant halo of warm divine light to bloom between them. Kneeling right before him, she gently urges him to calm down and take a deep breath. Raffle stares back at her with wide, bewildered eyes, his chest heaving as he gasps for air. Surprised by the soft warmth of her touch, he slowly closes his eyes and exhales a long, shaky breath, letting the heavy tension drain away as the suffocating dark aura completely fades. Looking up at her in utter disbelief, he reveals that the moment her hand touches his, he can no longer hear or see the tormenting spirits. For the first time in his cursed life, the deafening world around him falls completely quiet, making all his centuries of struggling feel strangely hollow. Haunting memories of his tormented past flash before him, recalling how terrified townspeople reviled him for shouting at empty air and branded him a devil's child. Throughout all his brutal regressions, he was forced to carry the unbearable, agonizing weight of a life spent in total isolation and utter misunderstanding. Attempting to lighten the heavy mood, she mischievously wriggles her feet and asks if pressing them against him would cure his torment even faster. Thoroughly flustered by her absurd suggestion, Raffle hastily releases her hands and backs away, letting the suffocating dark aura dissolve into an unexpected moment of light-hearted relief. Curious about her newly discovered divine gift, she wonders aloud why the holy temple never recognized her soothing presence, even when she was escorted by high knights. Narrowing his eyes sullenly, Raffle demands to know if she held hands with her former companion, prompting her to playfully tease him for sounding like a petty, jealous boyfriend as he flusteredly denies it. Pausing thoughtfully to reflect, she asks whether gentle, benevolent ghosts might exist to fight off the malevolent spirits constantly hovering around him. Crossing his arms in firm disapproval, Raffle bluntly shuts down her hopeful theory, insisting that no good spirits exist in this cruel world, and that every single entity surrounding them harbors nothing but pure malice. Almost as if proving his point, the heavy wooden cabinet behind her begins to violently rattle without warning. Within seconds, stack after stack of ceramic plates slide off the shelf, hurtling through the air and smashing violently against the wooden floorboards into a heap of jagged, scattered shards. Startled out of her skin by the terrifying crash, she instinctively retreats right against his chair, trembling beside him in sheer fright. As she cowers at his side, Raffle casually explains that shattered furniture is an everyday norm, watching her closely as he realizes she can finally sense the terrifying reality he constantly endures. Furious over the broken dishes, she points into the empty room and angrily demands to know if the ghosts pay rent, warning them to clean up their own mess before someone gets hurt. Raffle stands by in total disbelief, completely dumbfounded by her sudden outburst. Turning toward the hovering phantoms, Raffle plainly informs them that the spirit responsible for the damage will be the one cleaning it up. Immediately, a little ghost boy throws a temper tantrum, protesting that it is unfair to make him tidy up alone when everyone else joined in on the chaos. As she looks around in confusion, Raffle suddenly bursts into a soft, genuine laugh, his usual cold demeanor melting away. Annoyed by his unexpected reaction, she pouts and demands to know why he is laughing when she is being completely serious. Looking at her with a gentle smile, Raffle admits that, throughout all his lessons, the tormenting spirits had only ever appeared as pitch-black, shadowy figures. But thanks to her presence, for the very first time, he can actually see their human faces and watch them interact like normal people. Around them, the distinct spirits, from trembling young maidens to stern former knights and elderly townsfolk, begin squabbling among themselves in fear. Terrified by her divine aura, they frantically debate who should pick up the broom while trying to shield the children from her wrath. Suddenly, a loud, echoing rumble cuts through the room, drawing every spirit's attention. Blushing furiously under Raffle's amused gaze, she flusteredly insists it wasn't her, before sheepishly confessing that she hasn't eaten a single bite since escaping the holy temple. Standing up with an easy grace, Raffle extends his hand toward her with a warm, charming smile. He softly asks if his dear bride-to-be would like to enjoy a meal before the sun sets, prompting her to give a bashful, hesitant nod of agreement. Stepping outside into the warm afternoon sunlight, she strolls comfortably alongside Raffle down the quiet village path. With the suffocating dark aura entirely gone, a peaceful sense of calm settles between them as they head off together to share a meal. Watching closely from behind the window, the lingering spirits look on as the newly bonded pair walks away. Chatter erupts among the phantoms, chuckling in light-hearted amusement over the arrival of such a remarkably intimidating Saintess who has effortlessly reshaped their world. Walking through the crowded town square, she notices the locals keeping an uncomfortably wide distance from them. Her confusion turns to utter disbelief when every single restaurant turns them away with flimsy excuses, leaving her throwing up her hands in sheer exasperation. Wondering aloud if her divine appearance is scaring people off, he quietly steps in to set the record straight. He explains that without his official title as a war hero, rumors brand him a madman who talks to ghosts, yet she simply teases his dark reputation without showing a single trace of fear. Having spent a lifetime burdened by rejection and harsh insults, he gazes down at her in subtle disbelief. Her easy acceptance and complete lack of prejudice catch him off guard, even as the emotional weight is softened by the loud grumble of her stomach. Relieved to finally purchase simple street food under the glowing lanterns of the night market, they walk side by side in high spirits. Little do they know, a group of covert onlookers is tracking steps from behind the bushes, terrified of getting too close. The hidden pursuers squabble nervously among themselves, bound by orders to bring her back safely while trembling at the thought of her power. But their comical bickering abruptly turns pale when a translucent ghost appears, calling out to Mr. Morphin with a spine-chilling whisper. As twilight settles over the quiet cobblestone street, he plainly confirms the heavy reality of his regression, explaining that time turns back only upon his death. She nods thoughtfully between bites of food, remembering how his fatal fall off a cliff had swept her back in time alongside him. She playfully complains about past timelines interrupting her quiet meals, but her humorous tone gradually fades into a vulnerable silence. Matching his stride through the night, she looks down at their footsteps and softly asks what would become of the world if she were the one to die first. Standing beneath the lanterns of the evening sky, he plainly explains that time flows on, without pause, resetting only when his own life comes to an end. The sheer gravity of his words settles heavily upon her, sparking a sudden, deeply unsettling realization about how many times her own life was cut short without her ever knowing. Horrifying memories of her past tragic deaths rush back to haunt her mind, from being burned at the stake to perishing repeatedly across forgotten timelines. A chilling truth dawns on her as she realizes her entire lifespan has constantly hung in the balance, ending at any given moment depending entirely on his mortality and actions. Driven by sudden panic at the thought of ever accidentally displeasing him, she abruptly breaks into a comical bow, blurting out frantic apologies for any potential past disrespect. He gazes down at her with complete bewilderment in his dark crimson eyes, forcing her to nervously giggle and awkwardly wave off her sudden burst of panic. As darkness fully blankets the town, he calmly turns to suggest that it is time to head back home. But before she can even finish agreeing with him, a mysterious blue magic aura violently grabs her, hauling her backward into a dark doorway as he shouts her name in shock and dashes to her rescue. Tumbling onto the floor inside the shadowy room, She groans in pain while he immediately warns her to stay still due to an unseen wraith's presence. Suddenly, the wooden door slams shut with a heavy burst of blue light, locking them inside despite his frantic efforts to pull the sealed entrance open. As he curses under his breath while desperately struggling against the magic-sealed barrier, a creepy, masked wraith rises silently out of the pitch-black shadows directly behind his shoulder. The haunting ghost leans in unnervingly close, whispering a spine-chilling question asking if they truly wish to find a way out. The haunting spirit glides down upside down from the doorway as eerie blue magic fills the room, delivering an absurdly specific condition for their release. Pointing a pale, ghostly finger, she chillingly demands that they kiss each other if they ever hope to leave, leaving Raffle staring back in sheer unamused disbelief at the ridiculous ultimatum. Outside the building, their hidden pursuers peek nervously through the window pane, trembling in fear at what is transpiring inside. Recognizing the wraith as a resident spirit from his own estate, Raffle demands she stop talking nonsense and unlock the door, but she completely ignores his order to bitterly lament her past while Shuana looks on in complete bewilderment. Recalling her past life walking through a sunlit meadow with her former love, the ghost wistfully explains that seeing them together reminded her of the tragic betrayal she suffered when her sister stole her fiancé. Determined to witness romance, she slams her phantom hand against the cracking wall, declaring she will not move until her romantic wish is satisfied. Completely unmoved by her tearful story, Raffle glares at the spirit and coldly threatens to erase her from existence right then and there. But before he can unleash his power, another spectral force wraps around his torso as a child spirit latches onto his waist, shouting wildly for a kiss while Raffle frantically tries to push it away. Unable to hear the spectral voices, Shuana anxiously steps forward and asks what the ghosts are saying and why he is struggling so fiercely. But before Raffle can explain the absurd situation, translucent phantom hands materialize directly behind her back and push her forward with overwhelming force. Pushed completely off balance, she stumbles forward and crashes headfirst into his chest, her arms instinctively wrapping around his waist to steady herself. As a vibrant floral light erupts around them, she blushes deeply in utter confusion, looking up into his eyes while remaining locked tightly in his unexpected embrace. Trapped together in a sudden, breathless embrace while translucent light swirls around them, panic surges through her as she frantically stammers that she never intended to fall against his chest. But as he gazes down into her startled eyes while the surrounding spirits chant for them to kiss, his own heart begins to race. Overwhelmed by the absurd pressure, he desperately tries to convince himself that he must be possessed by the wretched ghost. Placing a firm, reassuring hand onto her shoulder, he gently tells her to bear with him for just a single second, explaining that this is the absolute fastest way for them to break free. Before she can even comprehend what his words mean, he leans in close and presses his lips directly against hers in a sudden, shocking kiss that leaves her wide-eyed and completely frozen. The spell shatters in a bright burst of blue light, launching them both out of the dark doorway and tumbling comically onto the hard cobblestones of the street. Picking herself up off the ground, Shuana laughs nervously, asking if that sudden kiss was just a clever, calculated move to break the seal, while he crouches beside her in heavy, embarrassed silence. Just outside the doorway, the lingering spirit accomplices panic and bicker hysterically among themselves over the chaotic outcome. Veins pulsing with dark irritation, Raffle unleashes a terrifying aura, coldly threatening to erase them from existence if they do not vanish immediately. As the terrified ghosts scatter into the night sky, he pulls Shuana back to her feet, dismissing her confused questions with a sharp warning that she doesn't need to know. Holding tightly to her hand as they turn to walk away, an elderly townswoman hobbles up with a cane, staring at them in pure disbelief that they stepped out of the notorious haunted house completely unharmed. Unwilling to get dragged into further town gossip or strange misunderstandings, Raffle quickly pulls Shuana past the stunned woman, guiding her back through the quiet night. Before they can take another step, the old woman strikes her cane against the cobblestones and abruptly drops to her knees in desperate plea. Promising to reward them handsomely if they aid her just once, her sudden proposal leaves both Raffle and Shuana turning back in utter surprise. Following an elderly woman through the dimly lit forest at night, the young couple treading carefully along the quiet path. As they walk side by side, she leans in to whisper, asking if he spots any dark spirits lingering near their guide. he quietly reassures her that nothing is there, right as the old lady stops to announce they have reached the property. Standing before the secluded estate, the old woman explains that she put the house up for sale to live with her son. However, no one can step inside as anyone who touches the gate is violently thrown back and injured by an unseen force. Hearing this, the couple gazes toward the quiet residence in watchful silence. Peering over the wooden fence, the young woman scans the desolate yard for any clues. Her eyes fall upon a small wooden doghouse and an abandoned bone sitting near a wooden cart. Realizing something might be amiss, she thoughtfully turns to ask the old lady if a dog once lived on the property. A heavy silence settles over the group until he bluntly asks if her dog had passed away. His blunt question startles his companion in disbelief, but the elderly woman sadly nods in agreement. Expressing deep sorrow, she mourns that she was never able to do enough for her loyal companion before he departed. Dismissing the idea of a curse, he calmly points out that if the house were truly haunted, the old lady herself could not remain unharmed. With a firm protective gesture, he rests his hand on his companion's shoulder and turns her around, announcing that it is time for them to leave. Desperate not to lose their help, the old lady collapses to her knees, pleading frantically for them to investigate just a little longer. Before they can step away, a low, menacing growl reverberates through the darkness. His gaze sharpens instantly, his crimson eye narrowing as he senses danger lurking nearby. In a flash of violent movement, an unseen entity strikes without warning. Blood drips from a fresh slash across his forearm, forcing a sharp gasp of shock from his lips as the hidden threat makes its presence known. Leaping forward instinctively to shield both women, he commands them to fall back while keeping his gaze locked on the surrounding forest. Yet as sinister, taunting voices echo through the gloom, mocking his frantic glances, he grits his teeth in frustration, struggling to pinpoint where the hidden dark entity is lurking in the shadows. Suddenly, the ground fractures beneath his feet in a terrifying surge of dark red aura. Cruel, tormenting whispers invade his mind, chanting for him to die. As dozens of shadowy hands reach out to claw at his face and drag him into a nightmare of agony, he reaches upward, helplessly crying out for an end to the torture. Refusing to let him drown in the shadows, she reaches directly into the gloom and grasps his hand. Soft light breaks through the darkness as she holds him tightly against her chest, crying out Raphael's name in desperation. She tearfully begs him to open his eyes and wake up, reassuring him that she won't let go. Haunted by memories of watching people die right before her eyes, an overwhelming surge of holy energy awakens within her soul. Clasping her hands tightly around his wounded arm, a brilliant golden aura erupts from her body, shattering the malevolent dark curse and violently snapping them both back to the quiet night. Stunned and bewildered, he blinks up at the night sky as the chaotic vision clears. She sits right beside him on the grass, exhaling a long sigh of relief while tenderly cradling his injured hand. Still trembling from the scare, she admits just how terrified she was when he suddenly collapsed and started convulsing. He stares at her with quiet wonder as a soothing warmth washes away his lingering pain. Gently he presses them softly against his face, closing his eyes in peaceful rest. Feeling truly alive, for the first time, he realizes that if Shuana stays by his side forever, he can finally keep on living. Noticing the distinct bite marks across his hand, he quickly realizes that the hidden entity protecting the estate is actually the old lady's late dog, Toffee. Upon hearing her pet's name, the elderly woman gasps in complete shock, trembling in disbelief as she asks if they can truly see her beloved companion. A gentle white spirit dog manifests in the warm light, its ear twitching as it barks happily. Observing its delicate movements, he points out that the creature is limping on its rear left leg, causing the heartbroken woman to collapse to her knees in overwhelming sorrow. Weeping uncontrollably beside the spirit, the old woman berates herself for failing to carry her suffering companion when his leg was hurting. Tears stream down her face as she tearfully apologizes, devastated that her lingering grief may have trapped his soul in this realm instead of resting peacefully. Deeply moved by the old woman's grief, Shuana covers her mouth in sympathy before crouching near the grass. With a gentle smile, she begins cooing softly to call the spirit dog closer, explaining to her skeptical companion that guiding Toffee will help the grandmother finally know his exact location. He scoffs at her attempt, gesturing toward the fresh scratches on his arm to argue that the ghost dog is aggressive toward everyone except its owner. Yet the moment she holds out her hands, the spirit dog pounces joyfully into her lap, leaving him reeling back in utter shock. Before they can process what happened, Shuana suddenly loses consciousness and collapses onto the dark grass. Panic surging through him, he instantly lunges forward to catch her, cradling her shoulders tightly while frantically calling out her name in desperation. Without warning, Shuana snaps her eyes open wide with a lively expression and bounces right back up. Thoroughly startled by her sudden dramatic revival, he stumbles backward in bewilderment as she enthusiastically beams up at him and asks if he is feeling all right. Channeling the gentle spirit of the late companion, Shuana leaps eagerly into the elderly woman's arms with pure childlike enthusiasm. Speaking in Toffee's voice, she tenderly reassures his beloved owner, lightheartedly telling her to rest her aching knees so she can remain healthy and energetic for years to come. As Toffee's cheerful ghost barks happily above them, tears stream down the woman's face in overwhelming relief and joy. Wrapping her arms tightly around Shuana, the woman tearfully thanks her loyal pet for remaining by her side, promising to live out her full life before reuniting with him in the beyond. Hugging the woman back with soft warmth, Shuana tenderly reassures her to take all the time she needs, promising that Toffee is very patient. Wrapped in a radiant golden glow of peaceful resolution, the spirit dog shares one final affectionate embrace with its owner before fading peacefully into the light. As the spiritual possession gradually subsides, Shuana slowly blinks open her eyes to find Raphael hovering over her with genuine concern. Before he can even finish asking how her body feels, she suddenly pops back up with her usual lively energy, sheepishly admitting she only feels slightly drained. Shaking his head with a faint smile, Raphael sighs softly, remarking that bizarre and inexplicable events always seem to unfold around her. Resting his hand against his face while glancing down at his lingering bite mark, he remains quietly amused and deeply fascinated by her remarkable divine ability. Filled with profound gratitude, the elderly woman bows deeply toward them both, expressing her sincere thanks for enabling her to bid a final goodbye. Tenderly taking her hands in her own, Shuana smiles warmly, reassuring her that Toffee departed for the spirit realm with a truly peaceful heart. Watching her interact with such effortless kindness, a quiet smirk touches Raphael's lips as he thoughtfully reflects on her spiritual gift. Framed by delicate floral light, Shuana beams with radiant joy, deeply satisfied to have brought lasting peace and healing to a grieving heart tonight. As Shuana tenderly cradles the elderly woman's hands in a heartwarming gesture of compassion, Raphael watches her with growing wonder and reverence. Witnessing the profound solace she brings to a grieving heart, he quietly begins to wonder if her extraordinary divine power extends far beyond simply banishing evil spirits from this world. As they walk together through the quiet forest at night, he endlessly checks on her condition, asking if she can move properly, hears dying voices, or smells anything foul. Exhausted by his relentless nagging, she finally loses her patience and shouts that her ears are going to fall off after uttering the exact same questions a dozen times. Dodging her swing with ease, he explains that he is only being cautious because his touch might be causing these strange phenomena. But when he teasingly points out how she trembled and clung to his hand at the sight of a ghost, she sputters back defensively that anyone would shake when facing near death in the freezing cold. He presses further, asking why a Saintess who jumped into deep water without hesitation would be so terrified of fire, carelessly suggesting she carries a painful past. The moment he sees the dark, solemn shadow fall across her face, he gasps in shock and quickly clamps a hand over his mouth in quiet regret. Stung by his insensitive probing, she turns around sharply to remind him that he dragged her along against her will just to avoid seeing ghosts. As she demands to know since when he cared enough to fuss over her with so many questions, he looks down sorrowfully and offers a sincere, humble apology for misspeaking. Softening her tone, she admits that their fates are now inextricably bound through regression, promising that she has no intention of abandoning him or running away in secret. Extending her open hand toward him, she offers to hold his hand as often as he needs for as long as they are living together. Genuinely touched by her gentle gesture, he touches his neck and expresses his quiet gratitude, only for her to immediately turn it into a bargain. Grinning playfully, she asks if his appreciation is strong enough to let her punch him once or twice, teasingly mocking his thoughtful silence when he hesitates. Taking a resolute step forward, he dramatically throws his arms wide open and grants her full permission to strike him. Thrilled by his sudden compliance, she flashes a bright, triumphant smile and eagerly rolls up her sleeve to deliver the promised hit. Warning him not to dare take back his word later, she does not hesitate for even a fraction of a second. She winds up and lands a surprisingly heavy strike right against his chest. Rattled to his core by the astonishing strength behind her blow, he recoils in sheer pain, staring back at her in wide-eyed shock as he gasps out just how much that hurt. Doubling over while holding his sore chest, he groans out in bewilderment, asking if she is truly meant to be a holy saintess. Bright and entirely unbothered, she stretches her arms contentedly and declares that unleashing that hit felt immensely refreshing. As she struts ahead with a satisfied stride, he calls out to ask if their scores are finally settled, but she playfully insists it all depends on how well he behaves from now on. Gazing after her, a soft smirk glides onto his face as he remembers her tender promise to remain by his side as long as they live together. Yet as her exact words echo in his mind, his smile instantly vanishes when he realizes she specifically mentioned staying until he actually dies. Overwhelmed by a sudden, chilling realization, he reaches out to gently clasp her sleeve, earnestly demanding to know if she harbors secret knowledge about his impending death. Startled by his intense query, she gasps his name and abruptly points into the distance, desperately shifting his attention to escape the uncomfortable truth. Stepping inside, they are met with a breathtaking sight as the spirits have miraculously scrubbed every corner of the residence. Golden light sparkles off pristine dishes, neatly organized shelves, and freshly washed linens hanging in order. Overwhelmed with absolute delight at the immaculate space, she flings her arms high into the air and sinks happily into the soft cushions of the couch. While she relaxes, a ghostly staff member quietly taps his shoulder, nervously begging him to check if their diligent housecleaning might excuse them from paying rent. Trapped between the expectant stares of the ghost crew hovering behind him and her cozy relaxation, he exhales a heavy sigh and reluctantly passes along their question, asking how she approves of the work. Lounging on the sofa, she immediately sees right through him, playfully asking if the lingering spirits sent him over as their spokesman. Brightening with a triumphant grin, she happily confesses that saying she likes it hardly captures her true joy, blooming with pure delight over the ultimate luxury of having automated ghost labor take care of every household chore. Deeply relieved by her gentle promise to remain by his side, a faint, soft smile touches his lips. Unseen by her, the ghost crew hovers in frustration behind his back, grumbling among themselves that they performed all the actual cleaning while she gets to relax. Turning around to catch his subtle shift in mood, she asks if something is wrong, but he quickly averts his eyes and insists that nothing is amiss. When they settle down together on the living room couch, the resident spirits cluster nearby, completely ignoring their presence to indulge in dramatic household gossip. The ghosts animatedly debate a tragic tale from a neighboring estate, where a duke's second son fell in love with a maid. They dramatically mourn how the duchess broke the lovers apart with money, passionately debating whether true love can ever survive such ruthless interference. While the spirits obsess over the high society heartbreak, he sits quietly on the sofa, silently enduring their noisy chatter. Finally pushed past his limit by their endless dramatic commentary, he flares up with a dark aura and sternly orders the spirits to go watch the scandal in person. At his command, the ghostly staff instantly scatters, leaving her tapping her fingers in quiet thought when he dismisses the commotion as mere useless gossip. Refusing to let their thorough housework go unappreciated, she suddenly stands up from the sofa and announces her intention to prepare a proper meal for the spirits. He skeptically points out that ghosts do not eat physical food, but she effortlessly shuts down his logic by asking if he has ever seen ghosts clean a mansion before, leaving him speechless. Directing her toward the guest room upstairs, he instructs her to rest while offering to sneak out to the town market alone at dawn to buy food. Confused by his insistence on going out in the pitch dark, she gazes up at him and asks why they cannot simply walk to the market together after sunrise. With a somber look, he reveals the harsh truth behind his dawn trips. After being ostracized by the town, merchants will only sell him discarded, spoiled leftovers when no other shoppers are around to see him. Looking at the basket filled with rotten bread and bruised vegetables, she boils over with righteous anger at the outrageous cruelty he faces. Gently soothing her outrage, Raffle rationalizes the town's cruelty, explaining that shopkeepers must protect their own livelihoods rather than risk their business on someone burdened with his grim reputation. Yet, as she addresses him by his full name, Raffle Winters, she gazes down at him with quiet, heartfelt intensity, refusing to let him diminish his own worth or accept such unfair treatment. Placing a comforting hand on his shoulder, she warmly reveals her own past lives as a low-ranking Saintess, proudly promising that no matter what humble ingredients he brings back from the Dawn Market, she will turn them into a feast finer than a count's head chef could make. Softening completely at her radiant confidence, he agrees to look forward to her cooking before she bids him a gentle goodnight and heads upstairs to rest. As she retires to the guest room upstairs, the resident ghost crew watches the pair from the doorway, exchanging knowing, playful glances at the tender atmosphere in the estate. Left alone on the sofa, Raffle rests his chin on his hand as an unmistakable smitten grin spreads across his face, leaving the ghosts chuckling approvingly at how thoroughly his heart has been stolen.